The rope was already around Cade Mercer's neck when the blizzard hit. 3 days ago, he'd been a stranger passing through. Now he stood on a barrel in Iron Ridge's town square, hands bound, while 50 desperate souls screamed for his blood. They called him saboteur, traitor, the man who'd doomed them all. Harlan Briggs tightened the noose with a grim smile. "Any last words, Drifter?" Cade's gray eyes cut through the gathering snow. "You're hanging the wrong man, and when that storm breaks, you'll know it." The barrel kicked. The crowd roared. But this story? It starts 3 weeks earlier. Stay with me until the end to see how one man's truth changed everything. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to know where you're watching from. The frontier had a way of stripping a man down to his bones. Out here, where civilization frayed into endless horizons of dust and stone, you either proved your worth or the land buried you. Iron Ridge understood this truth better than most towns clinging to existence in the Wyoming Territory. Built in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains, it was a hard place populated by harder people, ranchers, miners, and those running from something they'd rather forget. Cade Mercer rode into town on a borrowed horse 3 weeks before the rope found his neck. He came from the east, appearing like a mirage through the heat shimmer of late autumn, when the air still held summer's fever, but the nights whispered of winter's approach. The horse was gaunt, ribs showing through dusty hide. The man wasn't much better, tall and lean, with shoulders that had once been broader before hunger and miles wore him down. His coat had seen better decades, patched at the elbows with mismatched leather. His boots were held together more by will than stitching. But his eyes, those were sharp, gray as winter sky, missing nothing. The main street of Iron Ridge stretched before him like a dare. 24 buildings, most wood, some stone, all wearing the same expression of grim endurance. The saloon, the general store, the church that doubled as a meeting hall, a livery stable that smelled of manure and hay, homes scattered beyond like dropped dice. And everywhere, the dust. It coated everything, turned the world sepia, got in your teeth and lungs, and reminded you that this land owned you, not the other way around. People stopped to watch him pass. A woman hanging laundry, 2 men hauling timber, a child chasing a hoop who froze mid-step, staring. Their faces held the same wary calculation: stranger, outsider, trouble or opportunity. In Iron Ridge, usually both. Cade guided his horse to the livery, dismounted with the careful movements of someone whose body had been tested and found wanting recently. The stable hand, a teenager with suspicious eyes and quick hands, appeared from the shadows. "Help you?" Not friendly, not hostile, just the tone of someone who'd learned not to commit. "Need to board the horse. Few days, maybe longer." 2 bits a day. Grains extra. Cade counted out coins from a near-empty purse, the clink of metal loud in the quiet stable. The boy took them, examined each one with practiced efficiency, then nodded. "She'll be fed and watered. You got a name?" "Cade Mercer." "Where you from, Mr. Mercer?" "East." "That covers a lot of ground." "It does." Cade's tone made it clear the conversation was over. He pulled his saddlebag free. It sagged nearly empty, and turned toward the street. "Foreman's over at Briggs Ranch if you're looking for work," the boy called after him. "But fair warning, he don't take kindly to drifters." "Nobody does." Cade didn't look back. The saloon was called the Iron Horse, a name that promised more than the sagging structure delivered. Inside, it was dark and smelled of old beer and older dreams. A handful of men occupied the space like furniture, 2 playing cards at a corner table, 1 drinking alone at the bar, another sleeping it off in a chair tilted dangerously on 2 legs. The bartender was a woman in her 50s with arms like a blacksmith and eyes that had seen everything twice. She looked Cade up and down with the efficiency of someone pricing livestock. "Whiskey if you got it," Cade said. "Water if you don't." "Got whiskey. Question is whether you got coin." He placed his last dollar on the scarred wood. She poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass that had known cleaner days, took the dollar, returned no change. Fair enough. Frontier prices. Cade sipped slowly, making it last, letting the warmth cut through the dust in his throat. Behind him, he felt rather than saw the card players pause their game to study him. The man at the bar shifted slightly for a better view. Even the drunk stopped snoring. "You looking for work or trouble?" The bartender wiped a glass with a rag that probably made it dirtier. "Just passing through." Men who are just passing through usually don't stop in Iron Ridge. We're not on the way to anywhere worth going. Maybe I'm not going anywhere worth going. She almost smiled at that. Almost. You got a trade? I've done most things that need doing. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got. The saloon door swung open, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Not from the outside air, from the man who entered. He was big. Not tall big, though he had height, but thick big. Shoulders that filled doorways. Hands that looked like they could bend horseshoes. Somewhere in his 40s, with a face carved from granite and a jaw that had broken other men's knuckles. He wore work clothes, denim and leather, but carried himself with the authority of someone who gave orders and expected obedience. Harlan Briggs. Had to be. The way everyone suddenly found their drinks fascinating said as much. Harlan's eyes locked on Cade immediately, the way a wolf spots movement in the brush. He crossed to the bar with heavy footfalls, positioned himself deliberately close, invading space. Don't know you. Statement, not question. No reason you should. This is a small town. I know everyone. Then I guess it just got bigger. The drunk in the corner suddenly woke up and decided he had pressing business elsewhere. The card players folded their hands and watched with the attention usually reserved for cockfights. Harlan turned fully toward Cade, looming. You got a smart mouth for someone with empty pockets. Just a mouth. Smart's debatable. I'm the foreman at Briggs Ranch. Biggest spread within 50 miles. Everything that matters in Iron Ridge goes through me. You want work? You ask me. You want supplies? You clear it with me. You want to breathe? You do it respectful-like. We clear? Cade took another sip of whiskey, slow and deliberate. Clear as day. Something in Harlan's expression shifted. He'd expected compliance or defiance, gotten neither, and didn't know how to catalog it. He leaned in closer, voice dropping to a register meant to intimidate. Winter's coming. Hard winter, by the signs. We got enough trouble feeding our own without taking in strays. You best move along. Planning on it. Soon as my horse is rested. Rest it fast. Harlan held his stare another beat, then turned and walked out, his exit somehow more threatening than his arrival. The saloon exhaled collectively. The bartender refilled Cade's glass without being asked, without charging. You got a death wish talking to Harlan like that? Just tired of men who think volume makes them right. In Iron Ridge? It does. She leaned in, voice low. Harlan's family built this town. His grandfather surveyed the land, his father laid the first stones. The Briggs Ranch employs half the people here, feeds most of the rest. What Harlan says isn't just opinion, it's law. Every kingdom's got a king, Cade acknowledged. Doesn't make him smart. Smart enough to run a town for 15 years? World's full of fools who lasted longer. She studied him with new interest. You really just passing through? That depends. On what? On whether staying's worse than leaving. That night, Cade slept in the livery stable, buried in hay for warmth, listening to the horses breathe and the wind test the walls. The stable boy had offered grudgingly 3 bits for the privilege of a roof. Cade paid it and asked no questions about the holes in said roof that let starlight through. He woke before dawn to voices outside, low, urgent, angry. Third one this week, Harlan. That's not coincidence. Could be disease, could be bad feed, could be sabotage. Cade eased toward the stable door, peered through a gap in the boards. 5 men stood in the gray pre-dawn light. Harlan was there, and 3 ranchers Cade didn't know. The 5th was older, white-haired, carrying himself with the authority of age, if not power. Samuel, we've been over this. Harlan's voice carried patience worn thin. Who'd sabotage us? We're 50 miles from the nearest town. No rival ranchers, no claim jumpers, no reason for trouble. Then explain 3 dead cattle with slit throats. Silence. Heavy, like a held breath. Show me, Harlan said finally. They moved off toward the ranch lands, voices fading. Cade watched them go, instinct prickling the back of his neck. 3 dead cattle, slit throats. Winter coming. Someone was making a move. The question was why. He spent the morning exploring Iron Ridge, learning its geography the way a man learns a poker opponent's tells. The town was laid out simple enough. Main Street running east-west, Homes branching north toward the foothills, ranch land sprawling south toward open range. Water came from a creek that ran year-round, or so the locals claimed. Supplies came from a freight route that ran monthly, weather permitting. Emphasis on permitting. "You're still here." The voice came from behind him, female, edged with curiosity rather than hostility. Cade turned. She was younger than he expected, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back practical and eyes that matched the color of creek water. She wore work clothes like everyone else, but carried herself different. Educated, he guessed. Or at least literate. "Horse needs another day," he said. "Horse looked fine this morning. I saw you leading her around." Smart. "All right, I was curious." "About what?" "About a town this far from everywhere that's still breathing." "We're tougher than we look." "You'd have to be." She smiled at that, brief as lightning. "I'm Rachel Winters. My father runs the general store." "Cade Mercer." "I know, town this small. Word travels." She fell into step beside him as he continued his wandering, uninvited but not unwelcome. "So what's your story, Cade Mercer?" "Don't have one worth telling." "Everyone's got a story." "Maybe. Doesn't mean it's worth hearing." They walked in silence for a bit, past the church, past the schoolhouse that served a dozen children in good years, fewer in bad. Rachel pointed out landmarks with the ease of someone giving a tour she'd given before. "That's Doc Morrison's place. He's old, half-blind, but the only doctor within 100 miles, so we keep him alive. Over there's the Callahan family, 5 kids, all boys, all trouble. And that—" She gestured to a larger building at the edge of town. "That's the meeting hall. We gather there for decisions, disputes, dances when we're feeling optimistic." "Who makes the decisions?" "Officially, the council. 5 members elected by the town." "Unofficially?" Harlan suggests. "We agree." Sounds democratic. Sounds realistic. Harlan controls the largest ranch, the most jobs, the biggest share of winter supplies. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, not out here. Cade stopped walking, looked at her directly. "Why are you telling me this?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Because you're smart enough to see it anyway. And because—" She hesitated, choosing words carefully. "Because this town's changing. Has been for a while. And I'm not sure I like what it's changing into." "That's dangerous talk. Only if someone's listening." "I am." "You're leaving soon. What do you care what I say?" Fair point. Except Cade found he did care, though he couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was the way she looked at Iron Ridge, with the love-hate of someone bound to a place by roots too deep to pull. Maybe it was the way she spoke truth when everyone else traded in careful words. Or maybe it was just nice to be talked to like a person instead of a problem. "The cattle," he said. "The ones that died. That's not the first strange thing, is it?" Rachel's expression shifted, surprise and wariness mixing. "How did you—" "Overheard. This morning. 3 cattle, slit throats. Your face just now says there's more." She looked around, checking for eavesdroppers, then led him further from the main street to a spot where they could talk without being overheard. "Last month, the grain stores were contaminated. Mold, rats, we never figured out how. Lost a quarter of our winter supply. 2 weeks ago, the main well got fouled. Someone dumped something in it, made the water undrinkable for 3 days. We had to use the creek, cart water in buckets. Then the cattle. And yesterday—" She paused, the words clearly difficult. "Yesterday, someone broke into the church, destroyed the record books. Birth records, death records, land claims, all gone." Cade processed this, pieces clicking together into an ugly picture. "Someone systematically attacking the town's infrastructure. That's what I think. But Harlan says I'm paranoid, says it's bad luck, coincidence, the cost of living on the frontier. 3 coincidences is enemy action. That's what my father says. He was a soldier before. He knows the difference between accident and assault." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking younger. "But nobody wants to hear it, because if someone's attacking us, that means we have an enemy. And out here, with winter coming, an enemy is a death sentence. What about the law?" "Nearest marshal is in Cheyenne, 4 days' ride if the weather holds. By the time he got here, investigated, rode back, we'd be frozen or starved." She looked at him with sudden intensity. You seem like someone who knows things. Someone who's seen trouble before. Am I crazy? Am I seeing patterns where there's just chaos? Cade thought about the men he'd known, the wars he'd fought, the schemes he'd unraveled. Thought about the way coincidences stacked up when someone wanted them to. Thought about the feel of a town on edge, ready to tip. You're not crazy, he said. Someone's making a move. The question is what they want. The town? Maybe. Or maybe just chaos. Some men like watching things burn. Rachel shuddered. That's a horrible thought. Horrible's common as dirt out here. They stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the morning chill. In the distance, Cade could see men working the fields, women tending gardens, children playing games that involved more shoving than rules. Normal life, frontier life, life on the edge of a knife. You should leave, Rachel said quietly. Before whatever's coming arrives, you don't owe this town anything. No, Cade agreed. I don't. But he didn't move, and Rachel didn't push. Gesehen. The trouble started that afternoon, fast and mean as a snake strike. Cade was at the general store, Winter's Mercantile, according to the faded sign, buying supplies for the road. He'd decided Rachel was right. Whatever was happening in Iron Ridge wasn't his fight. He'd seen enough fighting for one lifetime. Time to move on, find some quiet corner of the frontier where a man could disappear. Rachel's father was behind the counter, a weathered man with kind eyes and careful hands. He counted out Cade's purchases with the precision of someone who'd learned that margins mattered. That'll be $6 even. Cade counted out the coins, nearly the last of his money, when the door slammed open. Harlan strode in, and he wasn't alone. 3 men flanked him, ranch hands by the look of them, all muscle and meanness. You. Harlan pointed at Cade. Outside now. I'm conducting business. Your business just ended. Mr. Winters straightened, voice firm despite the tension. Harlan, this is my store. You don't give orders here. Stay out of this, Eli. Harlan's eyes never left Cade. This drifter's got questions to answer. What questions? Cade kept his voice level, hands visible, posture relaxed. Aggression invited violence. Calm sometimes deflected it. Where were you last night? Sleeping in the livery. Anyone confirm that? The rats. We had a long conversation about philosophy. One of the ranch hands laughed, then choked it off at Harlan's glare. You think this is funny? Harlan stepped closer. 5 more cattle were killed last night. Throats cut, just like the others. And the stable boy says he saw someone moving around the livestock pens around midnight. Wasn't me. Convenient. The killing starts right when you arrive. I've been here 3 days. You said yourself the trouble started before that. Harlan's jaw clenched. Maybe you're scouting. Maybe you're working with someone. Or maybe you're just bad luck and we're better off without you. Cade could see where this was heading, the tracks laid plain as day. Harlan needed a target, and an outsider was perfect. Blame the drifter, run him out of town, problem solved. Didn't matter if it was true. Just mattered that it was convenient. I had nothing to do with your cattle. Prove it. Can't prove a negative. That's not how proof works. It is in Iron Ridge. The ranch hand spread out, cutting off the exits. Mr. Winters moved from behind the counter, face set. Harlan, you're talking about vigilante justice. We have laws, procedures. We have winter coming and someone killing our livestock. Harlan's voice rose, controlled fury breaking through. Every dead cow is food we don't have. Every day we wait is a day closer to starving. I'm not letting some stranger with no roots and no name put this town at risk. Rachel appeared in the doorway, breathless, like she'd been running. Father, She stopped, took in the scene, understood immediately. Harlan, no, you can't do this. Stay out of it, Rachel. He didn't do anything. You don't know that. Neither do you. Harlan turned on her, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or reluctance. But it passed, buried under the weight of whatever he'd decided had to happen. I'm giving you a choice, Mercer. Harlan's voice dropped to something almost reasonable. You can leave now, voluntarily, and we'll call it done. Or you can stay and face trial by the council. Your choice. Some choice. Leave or be railroaded. That's frontier justice. That's a lynching with extra steps. Harlan's hand dropped to his belt where a pistol sat holstered. He didn't draw it, but the threat was clear. You got till sunset to be gone. After that, you're trespassing, and I'll treat you accordingly. Cade measured the room. 4 armed men, no weapons of his own. Enclosed space, civilians in the crossfire. Only one smart play. Fine. I'll leave. Relief flooded Rachel's face. Disappointment, too, maybe. Mr. Winters just looked tired. Harlan nodded, satisfied. Smart choice. Get your horse and go. Give me an hour to gather my things. You got 30 minutes. They escorted him to the livery like criminals escorting a prisoner. The stable boy watched with wide eyes, probably already spinning the story he'd tell later. How I saw the drifter get run out of town. Cade saddled his horse in silence, every movement watched. He took his time, checking straps and buckles with exaggerated care. Not stalling, exactly, just thinking. Iron Ridge was dying, slowly, systematically, by someone's careful hand. The cattle were just the latest move. Winter would come, supplies would fail, people would panic. And in that panic, someone would make their play. Not his problem, not his town, not his fight. He mounted up, turned the horse toward the eastern road. Behind him, Harlan spoke one last time. One more thing, Mercer. If we find out you were involved, if you come back, if I even hear your name again, there won't be a choice next time. Just a rope and a short drop. We clear? Clear. Cade rode out of Iron Ridge as the sun climbed toward noon, watched by suspicious eyes and fearful faces. The town receded behind him, swallowed by distance and dust. He made it 2 miles before he stopped. 2 miles of thinking about Rachel's eyes when she said the town was changing, about Mr. Winter's careful honesty, about the stable boy who'd shown him small kindness despite suspicion, about all the people in Iron Ridge who hadn't asked for whatever was coming, who just wanted to survive another winter, about how easy it was to run, how hard it was to stay. Cade sat his horse, staring at the empty horizon ahead. East was safety. East was anonymity. East was everything he'd been chasing for 3 years. East was empty. He turned the horse around, not toward Iron Ridge. Harlan would have men watching, but north, into the foothills, toward the ridgeline that gave the town its name. Rough country, cold country, but country where a man could move unseen, could watch, could learn, could maybe do something that mattered. The horse didn't argue. Horses were smart that way. The days that followed taught Cade the geography of patience. He made camp in a ravine 3 miles north of town, hidden from casual view, with sight lines down to the valley where Iron Ridge sat like a scar on the landscape. He rationed his supplies, hunted small game, drank from a trickle of a stream that would freeze solid in a month. And he watched. At night, when darkness gave him cover, he moved closer, circled the town perimeter, learning the rhythms of ranch patrols, the habits of night guards, the patterns of life continuing despite the fear. The sabotage continued. 2 more cattle dead. A barn fire that destroyed winter hay, started by accident, Harlan proclaimed, though the timing was too convenient. The freight wagon that was supposed to arrive with supplies broke an axle 10 miles out, its cargo exposed to weather and scavengers before help arrived. Each incident tightened the noose around Iron Ridge's neck a little more, and each incident made Harlan's authority grow stronger. Fear made people crave certainty. They looked to him for answers, for protection, for someone to blame. He gave them all 3: confident proclamations, armed patrols, and a growing list of suspects ranging from native raiders to rival towns to bad luck incarnate. Everything except the truth. Because the truth required looking inward, and communities rarely wanted to do that. Easier to blame outsiders. Easier to trust the devil you knew than question whether he might be the actual devil. Cade watched it all from the shadows, piecing together the puzzle. On the 5th night of his exile, he finally saw what he'd been looking for. It was past midnight, moon hidden behind clouds, when movement caught his eye. A figure moving with purpose from the edge of town toward the livestock pens. Too deliberate to be casual. Too careful to be innocent. Cade followed at a distance, using terrain and darkness for cover. The figure moved like someone who knew the land, avoiding open spaces, sticking to shadows. At the pens, they paused, looked around, then climbed the fence. The cattle stirred, nervous. The figure pulled something from their coat. Cade couldn't see clearly, but the motion was familiar. Blade work. He moved fast then, closing the distance in long, silent strides. 20 yards. 10. 5. The figure turned at the last second, startled, but Cade was already there. He grabbed their arm, twisted, sent the knife flying into the darkness. They struggled, strong, trained, but surprise and leverage were on Cade's side. He forced them down, pinned them, got his first clear look at their face in the dim starlight. Young, male, familiar, the stable boy. "Let me go!" The kid thrashed, voice high with panic. "Not until you tell me why." "I don't know what you're talking about." Cade increased pressure on the arm he held, not enough to break, but enough to make cooperation attractive. "The cattle, the fires, all of it, why?" "You're crazy. I was just checking." "With a knife?" The boy went still, calculation replacing panic. Too smart for his own good, this one. "If I tell you, they'll kill me. If you don't, I'll make you wish they had." A long silence, broken only by the nervous sounds of cattle and the wind moving through dry grass. Then the boy spoke, voice hollow with defeat. "Harlan pays me. $20 a week, more than I'd make in a year otherwise. I do what he says, no questions." The pieces clicked into place with awful certainty. "Harlan's behind the sabotage. I don't know his reasons. He just tells me what to destroy, when to do it, how to make it look like accident or outsiders." The boy's voice cracked. "I needed the money. My ma's sick. Medicine's expensive. I didn't think anyone would really get hurt. Everyone's getting hurt. I know that now, but it's too late. If I stop, if I talk, Harlan'll—" He swallowed hard. "You don't cross Harlan Briggs, not in Iron Ridge." Cade felt the weight of it settle on him. The ugly truth of small-town tyranny. The way power corrupted even good intentions. The thousand small compromises that led to catastrophe. "What's the end game?" he asked quietly. "What's Harlan trying to accomplish?" "I don't know. I swear I don't. He just keeps saying the town needs to understand, needs to appreciate what he does for them, needs to remember who's really in charge." Control. It always came back to control. Harlan wasn't attacking the town. He was reminding it who held the leash. Cade released the boy, stepped back. The kid scrambled to his feet, looking ready to bolt. "Go home," Cade said. "Don't do any more jobs for Harlan. If he asks why, tell him you got spooked by the drifter who came back." You're not going to turn me in?" "You're a kid who made bad choices for good reasons. That's not crime, that's just life." He met the boy's eyes. "But if you keep making those choices, next time I won't be so understanding." The stable boy nodded, tears streaking his dusty face, and ran. Cade stood alone in the darkness, the truth a cold weight in his chest. Harlan Briggs was orchestrating Iron Ridge's destruction from the inside. But knowing that and proving it were different things. The boy's testimony would be dismissed, word of a child against the town's most powerful man. The sabotage could continue indefinitely, blamed on bad luck and outsiders. Unless someone stopped it. Unless someone became the outsider Harlan had already painted him as, and used that role to expose the truth. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Winter was close now. Cade could feel it in his bones, that old familiar ache that said the killing season approached. He looked south toward Iron Ridge, its scattered lights like dying embers in the vast darkness. Not his town, not his fight, but maybe, just maybe, his chance to be something other than the man who always ran. He started walking back to his camp, mind already working through plans and contingencies, angles and approaches. This would require precision, courage, and a willingness to gamble everything on a community that had already rejected him once. The smart play was still to leave. Cade had never been particularly smart. Behind him, the cattle settled back to uneasy sleep, unaware that their guardian had just decided to become their champion. In Iron Ridge, Harlan Briggs slept soundly, confident in his power and control, unaware that the man he'd exiled had just become his worst nightmare. And on the ridgeline above them all, winter clouds gathered like an army preparing to march. The storm was coming, in more ways than one. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like winter's first breath. Cade woke in his ravine camp with frost on his bedroll and a plan forming in his mind like ice crystals, delicate, sharp, and potentially deadly if handled wrong. He'd spent the night thinking after his encounter with the stable boy. The truth was clear now. Harlan was systematically destroying Iron Ridge from within, orchestrating chaos to tighten his grip on power. But truth without proof was just noise, especially when spoken by the town's designated scapegoat. Cade needed evidence, hard, undeniable, public evidence, and he needed to survive long enough to present it. The first part meant getting closer to Harlan's operation. The second meant not getting shot in the process. He broke camp methodically, scattering ashes, covering tracks, leaving no sign he'd been there. The habits of a man who'd learned that survival meant staying invisible. Then he moved down the ridge toward Iron Ridge, using the early morning mist as cover. The town was already stirring. Smoke rose from chimneys, voices carried in the cold air. Normal life continuing despite the rot underneath. Cade circled wide, approaching from the west where the terrain offered better concealment. His target was Harlan's ranch, not the main house, but the foreman's office, where records would be kept. If Harlan was paying the stable boy, there'd be a ledger, proof, something concrete. He was 50 yards from the ranch boundary when the shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dust 2 feet to his left, a warning, not a miss. Cade froze, hands visible, as 3 riders emerged from behind a barn. Ranch hands, armed, looking eager for trouble. Well, well, the lead rider grinned without humor. Harlan said you might be stupid enough to come back. Guess he was right. Just passing through. Through our ranch. That's called trespassing, friend. We're not friends. The grin widened. No, we're really not. They dismounted, spread out in a practiced pattern. These weren't farmers playing at security. They were men who knew violence professionally. Cade recognized the type. Hell, he'd been the type, once upon a different life. Harlan wants to see you, the leader said. You can walk or we can drag you. Either way's fine with us. Cade calculated odds and angles. 3 armed men, open ground, no cover. Fighting would be suicide. Running would be suicide with extra steps. Sometimes the only move was forward. Lead the way. They walked him to the ranch house like a prisoner, which he supposed he was. The building loomed ahead, 2 stories of timber and stone, built to impress and intimidate. It succeeded at both. Harlan waited on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, looking for all the world like a man without a care. He watched Cade approach with the satisfied expression of someone whose predictions had proven correct. Mercer, I'm disappointed. Thought you were smarter than this. People keep saying that. I'm starting to think they're wrong. Harlan sipped his coffee. You know what happens to men who don't listen in my town? Let me guess. They have accidents. Mysterious, tragic accidents. Something flickered in Harlan's eyes. Surprise, maybe, that Cade knew more than he should. It passed quickly, buried under layers of practiced control. You're trespassing on private property. That alone gives me the right to shoot you. He set his coffee down with deliberate care. But I'm a reasonable man, so I'm going to give you one last chance. Tell me what you're doing here, what you know, and who you're working with. I'm not working with anyone. Then what were you doing skulking around my land? Admiring the view. Harlan's jaw tightened. Wrong answer. He nodded to his men. The first punch came from behind, kidney shot, professional and brutal. Cade's knees buckled. He stayed standing through sheer stubbornness, but the second blow to the ribs put him down. Here's the thing about drifters, Harlan said conversationally, as his men worked Cade over with practiced efficiency. Nobody misses them. Nobody asks questions. They just disappear. Happens all the time on the frontier. Cade tasted blood, fought to keep his vision from tunneling. Killing me won't stop what's coming. What's coming? Please, enlighten me. Truth. Harlan laughed, genuine amusement mixed with contempt. Truth? Out here? Son, truth is whatever people believe. And they believe you're a troublemaker who brought bad luck to Iron Ridge. Hell, half the town thinks you're cursed. The other half thinks you're sabotaging us deliberately. Either way, he crouched down to Cade's eye level. You're the perfect villain. Through split lips, Cade managed a smile. Villain's the wrong word. Oh? What's the right word? Witness. The blow to his head ended the conversation, sending Cade spiraling into darkness. What? He woke in a root cellar, cold and dark, with a headache that felt like railroad spikes through his skull. His hands were bound behind his back, ankles tied. Professional work, tight enough to hold, loose enough not to cut off circulation. They wanted him alive. For now. Footsteps overhead. Voices, muffled through floorboards. Can't just kill him, Harlan. People will ask questions. Let them ask. I'll tell them he attacked my men, threatened my property, self-defense. Samuel won't buy it. Neither will Eli Winters. They're already suspicious. Samuel's an old man clinging to outdated ideas of how things should work. And Eli's a shopkeeper with a smart-mouthed daughter who doesn't know her place. Neither of them matter. A new voice, younger, uncertain. What about the council meeting tonight? Word spread about Mercer being back. People are talking. Let them talk. By the time the meeting happens, Mercer will be gone, and I'll have a story about him confessing to the sabotage before he ran. Problem solved. The voices faded as the speakers moved away. Cade lay in the darkness, mind working through implications and possibilities. Council meeting, tonight. Public forum. If he could get there, get his evidence heard. First problem, escape. Second problem, staying alive. Third problem, convincing a hostile town to believe him over their established leader. The odds weren't good, but then they rarely were. Cade tested his bonds. The rope was quality work, but all rope had weaknesses. He felt along the knot structure, finding the tension points. His hands were already numb from cold and restricted circulation. That would make this harder. He worked slowly, methodically, using his wrists to create pressure against the knots. The technique was old, learned from a sailor in San Francisco who taught him that the secret to any bond wasn't strength, but patience and understanding leverage. An hour passed, maybe two. Hard to tell in the darkness. His wrists were raw, bleeding, but the rope was loosening. Another 30 minutes, and the cellar door opened. Light flooded in, painful after the darkness. Cade froze, trying to look more restrained than he was. Rachel Winters descended the stairs, carrying a lantern and a bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. 3 minutes, she whispered. That's all I could manage. Harlan's men are everywhere. Rachel, what are you— Shut up and listen. She knelt beside him, producing a knife from the bundle. The whole town knows Harlan brought you in. My father's calling for a council meeting, demanding you be allowed to speak before any punishment. Harlan agreed, but she cut through his ankle bindings with quick strokes. But I heard him talking to his men. You're not making it to that meeting alive. Then why are you here? Because someone has to do something. Because my father taught me that silence in the face of wrong makes you complicit. Because— She cut through his wrist bindings. Because you came back. You could have run, but you came back, and that means something. Cade's hands were free. He flexed his fingers, trying to restore circulation, biting back the pain. How do I get out? There's a drainage tunnel, east side of the cellar. Comes out near the creek. After that, you're on your own until nightfall. The meeting's at 7. If you can get there, if you can stay alive until then. She pressed the bundle into his hands. Food, water, and this. It was a ledger. Small, leather-bound, worn from use. Where did you get this? Harlan's office. My father and we've suspected him for weeks. We've been looking for proof. This is the foreman's personal log, payments, orders, everything. It's all there. The sabotage, the bribes, all of it. Cade stared at her, this young woman who'd risked everything to do the right thing. Rachel, if Harlan finds out, then I'll deal with it. Right now, you need to survive until tonight. She stood, already moving toward the stairs. The tunnel's behind those crates. Move them quiet. Harlan's men patrol every 15 minutes. Rachel, she paused, looked back. Thank you. She smiled, sad and brave. Don't thank me yet. Just stay alive. Then she was gone, the cellar door closing behind her, leaving Cade alone with stolen evidence and a ticking clock. He found the tunnel exactly where she'd said, narrow, damp, barely wider than his shoulders. He crawled through mud and darkness, the ledger pressed against his chest, every movement an agony of bruised ribs and scraped knees. The tunnel seemed endless. His breath came harsh in the confined space. Twice he had to stop, fighting panic and claustrophobia, reminding himself that forward was the only option. Then, light, cold air, the sound of running water. He emerged beside the creek, covered in mud and blood, looking like something that had crawled out of hell, which he supposed he had. No time to rest. Harlan's men would discover the empty cellar soon. He had maybe an hour's head start. Less if they brought dogs. Cade moved upstream, using the water to cover his tracks and wash away the worst of the blood. The creek was ice cold, fed by mountain snow melt, and it leached the warmth from his body even as it provided cover. He couldn't stay in long, but he didn't need to, just far enough to break the trail. Half a mile upstream, he climbed out and ran. The foothills swallowed him, rock and scrub providing concealment. Behind him, voices rose in alarm. They'd found the cellar empty. Dogs barked, excited and eager. The hunt was on. Cade ran until his lungs burned and his legs turned to rubber. Ran until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Ran until he collapsed in a crevice between two boulders, gasping, shaking, every inch of his body screaming protest. He lay there as the sun climbed higher, trying to gather strength for what came next. The ledger was still dry, miraculously intact. He opened it with trembling hands, began to read. It was all there. Payments to the stable boy, orders to sabotage specific targets, notes about timing and strategy. And more. Plans for after the sabotage succeeded, when the town would be desperate enough to accept any solution, even one that involved selling their land to Harlan for pennies on the dollar. This wasn't just about control, it was about acquisition. Harlan wanted to own Iron Ridge completely, and he was willing to destroy it first to make that happen. Cade closed the ledger, mind racing. This was the proof he needed, but getting it to the council meeting meant surviving the next 8 hours while Harlan's entire ranch force hunted him. The smart play would be to run again. Take the evidence to Cheyenne, bring back the marshal, do this legal and safe. But that would take a week. In a week, more people could die. In a week, winter would be closer and Iron Ridge would be weaker. In a week, Harlan would have time to cover his tracks, dispose of witnesses, rewrite the narrative. No, it had to be tonight. At the meeting, public, undeniable. Which meant Cade had to become very good at not being found for the next few hours. He ate the food Rachel had packed. Dried meat, hard bread, an apple that tasted like hope. Drank the water carefully, rationing. Then he moved again, deeper into the hills, finding a spot with good visibility and better concealment. And he waited. The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness. Twice, search parties passed within 100 yards of his position. He watched them through gaps in the rocks, a dozen men, armed, systematic, professional. They knew these hills, but Cade knew how to be invisible. As sunset approached, the search parties withdrew, consolidating closer to town. They probably thought he'd run for good this time, or died from exposure. Either way, problem solved. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Cade waited until full dark, then began his approach to Iron Ridge. Not directly. Harlan would have guards on all the obvious routes. Instead, Cade came from the north, over the ridge, down through terrain so rough that no one expected it. The journey took 2 hours of careful climbing and controlled falls. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, every bruise from the morning's beating had announced itself with renewed vigor. The meeting hall was lit up like a beacon, visible from a mile away. Voices carried on the cold night air, angry, frightened, demanding. The whole town had turned out, drawn by crisis and the promise of answers. Cade circled the building, looking for entry points and exit strategies. Guards stood at the main doors, Harlan's men, watching for him specifically. The windows were too exposed, the back door was locked. But the roof, he found a rain barrel, used it to reach the eaves, pulled himself up with arms that barely functioned. The roof was steep but manageable. He crawled to the ventilation cupola, peered through slats into the hall below. The room was packed. 50, 60 people, maybe more. All of Iron Ridge's adults gathered in a space meant for half that number. The air would be thick with body heat and tension. The council sat at the front, 5 members including Samuel, the old rancher, and Eli Winters, Rachel's father. The other 3 were Harlan's allies, ranchers who owed him money or favors. Harlan himself stood before them, addressing the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd already won. Understand your concerns. These have been difficult times, but I want to assure you all that we've identified the source of our troubles. He paused for effect, let the crowd lean forward. The drifter, Mercer. He's been sabotaging our town since the day he arrived. Murmurs of agreement, some doubtful voices mixed in. Samuel stood, liver-spotted hands gripping the table. That's a serious accusation, Harlan. What proof do you have? My men caught him on my property this morning, skulking around my barns. When confronted, he attacked them and fled. If that's not the behavior of a guilty man, I don't know what is. Where is he now? Eli Winters asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew more than he was saying. Gone. Ran like the coward he is, but not before confessing his crimes to one of my men. How convenient, Samuel said dryly. A confession with no witnesses. I have witnesses. 3 of my ranch hands heard every word. 3 men who work for you, Eli pointed out. Forgive me if I find that less than convincing. The crowd stirred, dividing along invisible lines. Some trusted Harlan implicitly. Others were starting to question. The fault lines in Iron Ridge's social structure were showing. Harlan's expression hardened. Are you calling me a liar, Eli? I'm saying I want more than hearsay before we condemn a man. He's not here to condemn, he's gone. Then why are we having this meeting? Good question. Cade watched Harlan's face, saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. This meeting wasn't about Cade. It was about consolidating power, eliminating dissent, making sure everyone understood who was in charge. We're here, Harlan said carefully, because this town needs leadership, clear, strong leadership, the kind that makes hard decisions and doesn't second-guess them. For weeks now, we've been drifting, questioning, doubting. And where has that gotten us? Dead cattle, burned barns, poisoned wells. We need unity. We need someone willing to do what's necessary. What you mean, Samuel said quietly, is you want us to give you complete authority. I want you to recognize reality. The reality that you've been orchestrating our disasters? The hall went dead silent. Harlan's face drained of color. What did you say? Samuel stood straighter, despite his age. I said I think you've been behind the sabotage. I think you've been systematically destroying this town so you could rebuild it in your image. And I think Mercer was getting too close to the truth, so you made him the scapegoat. That's insane. Is it? Then explain the accounting irregularities in your ranch ledgers. Explain the payments to unnamed sources. Explain why every disaster benefits you politically. Careful, old man. Harlan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Those are fighting words. Then let's fight. The crowd erupted, some in support of Samuel, others defending Harlan, most just shouting because tension demanded release. The council tried to restore order, failed, tried again. Cade knew his moment had arrived. He stood on the roof directly above the cupola and tore the slats free. Wood splintered and crashed to the floor below, drawing every eye upward. Samuel's right, Cade called down, his voice cutting through the chaos. Harlan's been destroying this town, and I can prove it. Pandemonium. Harlan's men rushed toward the center of the room, looking up, guns drawn. The crowd surged in confusion. Rachel saw him first, her face splitting in relief and terror. Don't let him speak, Harlan roared. He's a criminal. He'll say anything. I'm saying the truth. Cade pulled the ledger from his coat, held it up where everyone could see. This is Harlan's foreman log. It details every act of sabotage, every bribe, every plan. It's all here, in his own hand. That's a forgery. Then you won't mind if the council examines it. Harlan's face twisted with rage. I mind you breaking into my office and stealing my property. So you admit it's real. The realization of his mistake hit Harlan a second too late. His mouth opened, closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. Cade didn't give him time to recover. You paid a kid to kill your own cattle, paid him to poison the wells, burn the barns, destroy the records. You created every crisis this town has faced just so you could position yourself as the solution. You wanted Iron Ridge desperate enough to sell. You wanted to own it all. Lies. But Harlan's voice lacked conviction now. Read the ledger. Cade threw it down. The book landed at Samuel's feet. It's all documented. Dates, payments, targets, everything. Samuel picked it up with shaking hands, began to read. His expression darkened with each page. Around him, the crowd pressed close, reading over his shoulder, seeing the truth written in ink and calculation. "Harlan," Samuel's voice was funeral quiet. "What have you done?" For a long moment, nobody moved. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything it touched. Then Harlan did the only thing left to do. He drew his gun and aimed it at Cade. "You should have stayed gone!" The shot rang out before anyone could react, but Cade was already moving. He dropped through the cupola opening as the bullet passed through the space he'd occupied, landed hard on a table that collapsed under him, rolled, came up running. Chaos erupted. People screaming, diving for cover. Harlan's men drawing weapons. The council shouting for order that wouldn't come. Cade didn't have a gun, didn't have a weapon, didn't have anything but momentum and desperation. He charged straight at Harlan, closing distance before the man could aim again. They collided like locomotives, crashed through a row of chairs, hit the floor in a tangle of fists and fury. Harlan was bigger, stronger, but Cade was meaner, fueled by days of abuse and the righteous anger of someone who'd tried to do right and been punished for it. They rolled, grappled, fought with the primal intensity of two predators who knew only one would walk away. Harlan got a hand on Cade's throat, squeezed. Cade drove his thumb into the pressure point below Harlan's ear, made him scream and release. "Stop this!" Samuel's voice cut through the violence. "Both of you!" But they were beyond stopping. This was the reckoning, the moment when all the lies and pretense burned away and only raw truth remained. Harlan managed to get his gun up again, pressed it against Cade's ribs. "Should have killed you this morning." Cade headbutted him, saw stars, felt the gun discharge. The bullet went wide, buried itself in the wall. Someone was screaming, maybe multiple someones. Then Rachel was there, swinging a chair with everything she had. It connected with Harlan's shoulders, knocked him sideways, gave Cade the opening he needed. He grabbed Harlan's gun hand, twisted, felt something snap. The weapon clattered away. Harlan roared in pain and rage, launched himself at Cade one more time, but Cade was done fighting. He sidestepped, let momentum carry Harlan past him, stuck out a foot. Harlan went down hard, face first into the floor. The impact was spectacular. Teeth, blood, unconsciousness. Silence fell like a curtain. Cade stood swaying, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen places. Around him, the people of Iron Ridge stared with expressions ranging from horror to vindication to stunned disbelief. Samuel still held the ledger, the damning evidence of Harlan's betrayal. Eli Winters had his arm around Rachel, protective and proud. The other council members looked like they'd swallowed poison. "Well," Samuel said into the quiet, "I suppose that settles the question of leadership." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, relief breaking tension like a dam bursting. Cade wanted to say something profound, something worthy of the moment. Instead, his legs gave out and he sat down hard, the adrenaline crash hitting like a freight train. Rachel knelt beside him, producing bandages from somewhere. "You're an idiot. Heard that before?" Coming back was stupid. Attacking Harlan in front of everyone was stupider. "Glad we agree on something." She smiled despite herself, began cleaning his wounds with hands that trembled only slightly. Around them, the town began to process what had happened, what it meant, what came next. Harlan groaned, starting to regain consciousness. Two of Samuel's sons moved to restrain him, none too gently. "Council's going to have to discuss this," Samuel announced. "But I think it's clear that Harlan Briggs no longer speaks for Iron Ridge. His property, his position, his authority, all of it is forfeit pending formal investigation." Murmurs of agreement, some reluctant, most relieved. "And Mercer." Samuel looked at Cade with something approaching respect. "You're owed an apology, and probably a medal. Though I suspect you'd settle for a hot meal and a warm bed." "Sounds about right." "You'll have both. It's the least we can do for the man who saved our town." Cade wanted to argue that he hadn't saved anything yet, that winter was still coming and supplies were still short and the real work was just beginning. But exhaustion was dragging him down, making words difficult. Rachel finished bandaging his worst cuts, sat back on her heels. "You're going to have impressive scars." Collection's getting crowded." "I bet." She helped him to his feet, supported him when he swayed. "Come on, let's get you somewhere you can collapse properly." They made their way through the crowd, which parted to let them pass. Some people reached out to touch Cade's shoulder, murmur thanks, offer awkward but genuine gratitude. Others just watched, still processing, still uncertain. Outside, the night air was brutally cold. Winter's promise made manifest. Cade looked up at the stars, brilliant and indifferent, the same stars that had watched empires rise and fall, and never cared about either. "What happens now?" Rachel asked quietly. "Now?" Cade considered the question, the weight of it. "Now we survive winter, rebuild what's broken, figure out how to trust each other again." That's a tall order. Always is. They walked toward the winter's home, leaving behind the chaos of the meeting hall, the unconscious form of Harlan Briggs, and the shattered remains of the lie he'd built. Behind them, the door burst open. One of Harlan's men stumbled out, wild-eyed, panicked. "Fire!" he screamed. "The supply depot's on fire!" Cade turned, saw the orange glow rising from the south end of town, hungry and growing. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by cold realization. Harlan might be down, but his final move was already in play, and winter was still coming. The flames painted Iron Ridge in shades of hell. Cade ran toward the fire before his conscious mind registered the decision. Legs pumping despite exhaustion, lungs burning in the cold air. Behind him, Rachel shouted something, warning or encouragement, he couldn't tell. But he didn't slow down. The supply depot was the town's lifeline. Everything they needed to survive winter was stored in that building: grain, preserved meat, medicine, blankets, tools. Lose it, and Iron Ridge wouldn't last until Christmas. The depot sat at the southern edge of town, a massive timber structure built to withstand storms and time, but never designed to resist deliberate destruction. By the time Cade reached it, flames were already climbing the walls like living things, hungry and savage. Heat rolled off the building in waves that made breathing painful. A crowd had formed, bucket brigade already organizing, but Cade could see it was futile. The fire had too much of a head start, too much fuel. They weren't putting this out. They were watching their survival burn. "Where's Harlan?" Cade grabbed the nearest person, a young rancher whose face was streaked with soot. Still in the meeting hall, restrained. Why? Because this wasn't random. Because Harlan had planned for contingencies. Because a man who'd orchestrate months of sabotage wouldn't go down without a final, devastating move. Cade pushed through the crowd, searching for Samuel or Eli, someone with authority to... The explosion knocked him off his feet. The depot's western wall blew outward in a concussion of fire and splintered wood. Cade hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. Around him, people screamed. Debris rained down like hellish snow. The heat intensified, became a physical force pushing against his skin. He rolled, came up coughing, saw Rachel pulling someone away from the flames. Saw Eli Winters organizing the bucket brigade, shouting orders that barely carried over the roar of the fire. Saw the stable boy, the same kid who'd sabotaged the town for Harlan, standing frozen in horror at what his employer had ultimately created. "Dynamite," someone was saying, voice shaking. He had dynamite planted. He knew. He knew if we caught him, he'd burn it all. Scorched earth. If Harlan couldn't own Iron Ridge, he'd make sure nobody could. Samuel appeared through the smoke, face grim as a death mask. "The depot's lost. We need to stop the fire from spreading to the adjacent buildings. Eli, get everyone focused on the grain store and the smithy. If those catch, half the town goes with them." "What about the supplies?" a woman demanded, voice breaking. "That was everything. Our food, our medicine, gone. All of it." Samuel's voice was steady despite the catastrophe. "Which means we focus on what we can save. Move." The crowd shifted, reorganizing around this new reality. Buckets passed hand to hand. Men tore down fencing to create fire breaks. Women shepherded children to safety. Iron Ridge responded to crisis the way frontier towns did, with grim efficiency born of knowing that hesitation meant death. Cade wiped blood from his eyes. Debris had caught him above the temple, and tried to think. The supplies were gone. Winter was weeks away. The nearest town with surplus goods was 4 days' ride in good weather. Even if they sent riders immediately, even if those towns were willing to sell, they couldn't transport enough to sustain Iron Ridge through a hard winter. The mathematics of survival were brutal and simple. Too many people, not enough resources, no time to acquire more. "Cade," Rachel appeared beside him, face smudged with ash. "My father wants to know if you can ride." "Probably. Why?" Someone needs to go to Cheyenne, get the marshal, bring back whatever supplies they can carry. Father thinks you're the best choice. I'm barely standing. You're also the only one here who doesn't have family depending on them staying. Everyone else has ties, responsibilities. You're expendable. She flinched. I was going to say free to move, but yeah, essentially. Cade looked at the burning building, at the frantic efforts to contain the damage, at the faces of people who'd wanted him gone a week ago and now needed him desperately. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so bleak. 4 days to Cheyenne, but he said, thinking aloud. Maybe 3 if I push hard. Day to organize supplies and law. 3 days back, maybe 4 if we're hauling wagons. That's 10 days minimum. Can the town last that long? Honest question. Cade didn't have an honest answer. Depends on the weather. Depends on how much we can salvage from the depot before it's completely gone. Depends on luck. We're fresh out of that. The fire chose that moment to collapse the depot's roof, sending up a geyser of sparks and heat that pushed everyone back another 20 yards. In the light of the flames, Cade saw the full scope of what Harlan had destroyed. Not just supplies, hope. The psychological weight of watching your future burn was crushing. I'll ride at first light, Cade said. Have someone prepare the fastest horse you've got. I'll need dried food, water, warm gear, and a gun if you can spare one. Done. Rachel started to turn away, stopped. Cade? Thank you for not running when you had the chance. Ask me if it was worth it after we see who survives winter. She left him standing in the fire's glow, and Cade allowed himself one moment of pure exhaustion. His body was a catalog of pain, bruises, cuts, burns, broken ribs he hadn't had time to properly notice. His mind was worse, grinding through scenarios and outcomes, most of them ending in graves. Mercer? Eli Winters pushed through the crowd, breathing hard. We've got a problem. Another one? Harlan's gone. The words took a second to register. What do you mean, gone? I mean the men guarding him are unconscious, and Harlan's disappeared. Must have had help. Someone hit the guards from behind while everyone was focused on the fire. Of course. Harlan hadn't survived 15 years of frontier politics by being stupid. He'd have contingency plans, loyal followers willing to break him out when the moment came. The fire had provided perfect cover. How long ago? 10 minutes? Maybe 15? Could be anywhere by now. Cade's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. He won't run. Not yet. He'll want to finish what he started. Finish what? The depot's destroyed. There's nothing left to sabotage. There's everything left. The town's vulnerable now, distracted. Perfect time to hit the grain store, the well, the livestock. Harlan wants Iron Ridge dead. He'll keep killing it until it stops twitching. Eli's face went pale. The grain store. We moved everyone there to protect it from the fire. If he targets it now? They ran. The grain store sat on the opposite end of town, a stone building with a slate roof designed to resist exactly the kind of destruction that had claimed the depot. 20 people surrounded it with buckets and determination, ready to douse any sparks that drifted their way. None of them were watching the shadows. Cade saw the movement first, a figure slipping around the building's far side, moving with purpose toward the main door. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but the figure was faster. They kicked the door open, threw something inside, and ran. Everybody back, Cade roared. Back now! The more disciplined scattered immediately. Others hesitated, confused, turning to look. The second explosion wasn't as large as the first, but in the enclosed space it didn't need to be. The grain store's door blew off its hinges, flames erupting from within. The people who'd been standing closest went down, stunned or worse. Cade reached the building just as the fire took hold, catching on grain dust and dry wood supports. Inside, he could see the season's harvest, thousands of pounds of wheat and corn and barley, beginning to burn. The smell was almost sweet, like bread baking, a horrible parody of comfort. Water, Eli was shouting. Get water inside before it spreads. But it was already spreading, climbing the interior walls, finding every combustible surface. The stone structure that should have protected the grain was instead trapping the heat, turning the building into an oven. People rushed forward with buckets anyway, because what else could they do? Stand and watch their second lifeline burn? Cade grabbed Samuel's shoulder. You need to evacuate this building. The structure's compromised. When it goes, it'll take anyone inside with it. We can still save some of it. You can't. I've seen fires like this. It's gone. Get your people out before it kills them. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but he was smart enough to recognize truth when he heard it. Everyone out! Clear the building! They retreated, leaving the buckets, the effort, the hope. Stood in a ragged semicircle and watched their grain supply transform into smoke and ash. 2 buildings, someone said, voice hollow. He's destroyed 2 buildings in one night. Who? Another voice demanded. Who did this? Where's Harlan? Could be anyone, a third voice argued. Could be one of his men, still loyal. Could be... It was Harlan himself. The stable boy stepped forward, face streaked with tears and soot. I saw him, threw the dynamite and ran north toward the hills. You sure it was him? I've worked for him 2 years. I know how he moves. The crowd shifted, anger replacing despair, hunting instinct overriding grief. Someone produced a rifle. Someone else checked their pistol. The math was simple. Harlan had tried to destroy them. They would destroy him first. Wait. Cade stepped into their path. You go after him now, in the dark, on his terms. You'll walk into an ambush. He knows these hills better than anyone. He'll pick you off one by one. So we just let him go? I'm saying you think before you charge into the dark angry and stupid. That's how good men die. And if he keeps attacking while we're thinking, how many good men die then? Valid point. The crowd murmured agreement, rifles and torches raising. Samuel held up a hand. Cade's right. We can't afford to lose people chasing Harlan in the dark. But we also can't afford to leave him free to attack again. He turned to Cade. What do you suggest? What he suggested was ugly, but frontier justice often was. Postguards on every remaining building. Double shifts, armed, with line of sight to each other. Anyone approaches who shouldn't, you challenge them. They don't stop, you shoot. At first light, we organize a proper hunt. Trackers, hunters, people who know the terrain. We find Harlan and we end this. And tonight? We just hope he doesn't kill us all while we sleep? Tonight we don't sleep. Tonight we guard what's left. Because if we lose anything else come winter, we're all dead anyway. The grim truth settled over them like snow. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival, and survival required hard choices. All right, Samuel said. Who's willing to stand guard? Nearly every hand went up. Fear and anger made powerful motivators. They organized quickly, too quickly maybe, driven by desperation rather than planning. But it was something. Guards fanned out to the remaining storage buildings, the well, the livestock pens. Rifles loaded, torches lit. Iron Ridge transformed into an armed camp, expecting attack from the darkness. Cade found himself assigned to the livestock pens with Rachel and 2 ranchers. They positioned themselves at the corners, sight lines overlapping, weapons ready. The night stretched ahead, full of shadows and uncertainty. You think he'll come back? Rachel asked quietly, breath misting in the cold air. I think he's desperate. Desperate men are unpredictable. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the nervous sounds of penned animals and distant voices calling out positions. The fire still burned. The depot was a smoldering ruin, the grain store slowly collapsing in on itself. The orange glow provided light but also destroyed night vision, creating a perimeter of visibility surrounded by deeper darkness. Perfect conditions for an attack. An hour passed. Then 2. Cade's legs ached from standing, his wounds throbbed in the cold. He'd kill for coffee, for sleep, for a world where his decisions hadn't led him to this particular circle of hell. Why'd you really come back? Rachel asked, breaking the silence. Told you. To expose Harlan. That's what you did, not why you did it. She looked at him directly. You could have taken the ledger to Cheyenne, brought back the marshal, done it safe and legal. Instead, you came back to a town that hated you, to people who wanted you dead. Why? Cade considered lying, deflecting, giving her the easy answer, but exhaustion and proximity to death made honesty attractive. Because running's easy. Because I've been running for 3 years and it hasn't fixed anything. Because... He trailed off, searching for words. Because sometimes you get tired of being the man who wasn't there when it mattered. What weren't you there for? Different town. different time, different people who needed help I didn't give. The memories pressed close, uninvited. I walked away, told myself it wasn't my problem, wasn't my fight. 3 months later, I heard what happened to them. What could have been prevented if I just stayed, just helped? You can't save everyone? No, but you can save someone, and choosing not to makes you complicit. Rachel absorbed this, understanding dawning. So Iron Ridge wasn't about us, it was about you. It was about both. You needed someone willing to stand. I needed to prove I still could. He smiled without humor. Turns out we're both idiots. She laughed, brief and genuine. Yeah, we really are. The moment broke when one of the ranchers hissed a warning. Movement, north side. They turned, rifles raising, eyes straining against the darkness beyond the firelight. Cade saw it, a shape, man-sized, moving low and fast between buildings. Challenge him, Cade whispered. The rancher cupped his hands. Stop! Identify yourself! The figure froze, then slowly straightened. Don't shoot. It's Marcus. From the Callahan place. Step into the light. Hands visible. The figure obeyed, and it was indeed Marcus Callahan, one of the 5 troublesome brothers Rachel had mentioned. He looked terrified. What are you doing out here? The rancher demanded. I was checking the western perimeter, saw someone running toward the hills, tried to follow, but lost them in the dark. Marcus was breathing hard, adrenaline evident. But I found something. You need to see it. See what? Just come, please. They exchanged glances. Could be legitimate. Could be a trap. On the frontier, you never really knew until it was too late. Rachel, stay here with Thomas, Cade said. We'll check it out. Like hell. If it's a trap, you need someone watching your back. And if it's a trap here while we're gone? She considered, nodded reluctantly. Be careful. Cade and the second rancher, a man named Cole, followed Marcus through the dark streets. Iron Ridge looked different at night, hostile and foreign. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every corner could conceal an ambush. Marcus led them to the church, to the spot where the record books had been destroyed weeks ago. He pointed to the ground. In the dirt, written in what looked like charcoal or burned wood, was a message. Come alone to the ridge at dawn, or I burn the last well tonight. Harlan's handwriting. Cade recognized it from the ledger. It's a trap, Cole said immediately. Obvious as daylight. Of course it's a trap. Cade studied the message, trying to read between the crude letters. Question is, can we afford to ignore it? The well's guarded. He can't possibly. The scream cut through the night, high and terrified. From the direction of the well, they ran, weapons drawn, fear lending speed. The well sat in the town center, stone-lined and 50 feet deep. 4 guards had been posted around it, rifles ready, watching for exactly this kind of attack. 3 of them were on the ground, unconscious or dead. The 4th was backing away from a figure that emerged from the well itself, soaked and furious. Harlan. He'd gone into the well, actually climbed down into the water, waited there in the freezing darkness while everyone searched the hills. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of move a desperate man would make. In his hand, he held a sack that dripped something dark and viscous. Oil, Cade realized. Enough to poison the well water for months. Stop! Cade raised his rifle. Harlan smiled, face pale and determined in the torchlight. Shoot me and I'd drop this. Well's poisoned either way. Put it down, Harlan. It's over. Over? It's just beginning. Harlan's laugh was fractured, edges sharp with something beyond anger. You think you've won? You've destroyed everything. This was my town, built by my family, protected by my sweat and blood. And you... He jabbed a finger at Cade. You walked in with your moral superiority and turned everyone against me. You turned them against yourself. I just showed them the truth. Truth? Harlan spat the word. Truth is Iron Ridge was dying before I took control. Dying slow, withering away while the council debated and delayed. I made this town work. I made the hard choices they were too weak to make. And this is my thanks? People were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. They formed a circle around the well, weapons raised but uncertain. Nobody wanted to shoot and risk Harlan dropping the poison. Samuel pushed through the crowd. "Harlan, please. Whatever anger you feel, this isn't the answer. People will die." People were always going to die. I was just trying to control who and when. Harlan's voice dropped, became almost reasonable. "The frontier doesn't reward weakness, Samuel. You know that. Every town out here is one bad winter from becoming a ghost town. I was trying to make us strong enough to survive. By destroying us first? By removing the weak. By consolidating resources under proper leadership. By making the tough choices all of you were too sentimental to make." He held up the sack of oil. "And I'm still making them. You want this well? You want to survive winter? Then you meet my terms." "What terms?" Cade asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "Land deeds. Every property in Iron Ridge signed over to me, legal and binding. Do that and I'll step away. Won't poison the well, won't burn what's left. You'll have enough to maybe survive if you're lucky and ruthless. And if we refuse? Then I drop this, poison your last clean water source, and watch you die of thirst before winter even arrives." Harlan's smile was a rictus of pain and determination. "Your choice. Survival under my control, or freedom in the grave." The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cade's mind raced through options. Shoot Harlan. Well, gets poisoned. Rush him. Same result. Negotiate. Gives Harlan everything he wants. There had to be another move, another angle, something that didn't end in complete capitulation or total disaster. Then he saw it. The well's stone edge, the way Harlan was standing, the distance between them. It was a terrible plan. The odds were astronomical, but sometimes terrible plans were all you had. "All right," Cade said, lowering his rifle. "You win. We'll sign over the deeds." Relief and suspicion warred on Harlan's face. Smart choice. Just one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions. Let me drink from the well first, last clean water before you claim it. Frontier tradition. The condemned man gets a final drink. Harlan frowned, sensing a trap but unable to identify it. "Fine. 1 cup. Make it quick." Cade walked towards the well, hands visible, movement slow and non-threatening. He picked up the bucket and rope that sat on the stone rim, began lowering it into the darkness below. The rope played out. 10 feet, 20, 30. "Hurry up," Harlan growled. "Well's deep. Takes time." Cade pulled the bucket up, water sloshing. He raised it to his lips, drank deep. The water was ice cold, pure, tasting of minerals and stone. Maybe the last good thing Iron Ridge had left. He set the bucket down on the well's edge, directly between himself and Harlan. "Satisfied?" Harlan demanded. "Almost." Cade met his eyes. "Just wondering one thing." "What?" "You ever learn to swim?" Then he kicked the bucket. Water sprayed into Harlan's face, blinding him. His grip on the oil sack loosened reflexively. Cade lunged forward, grabbed Harlan's wrist, twisted hard. They grappled at the well's edge, both fighting for control of the poison. Harlan was stronger, but Cade had surprise and desperation. The crowd shouted, surged forward, but there was no clear shot, no way to help without risking both men. Harlan drove his forehead into Cade's nose. Bone crunched. Blood flowed. Cade's vision went white. But he didn't let go. Couldn't let go. If that sack fell into the well, everything ended. "Should have killed you," Harlan snarled, voice hoarse with effort. "Yeah, you mentioned that." Cade hooked his leg behind Harlan's knee, shoved with everything he had left. They toppled backward, away from the well, away from the poison, hit the ground hard, still fighting. The sack flew from Harlan's grip, arced through the air. Rachel caught it. She'd sprinted from her guard post when the commotion started, arrived just in time to snatch the oil from mid-flight, stood there breathing hard, holding the town's fate in her hands. "Got it," she said unnecessarily. Harlan roared in frustration and fury, threw Cade off him, scrambled to his feet. But he was surrounded now, 20 people with rifles in rage, nowhere to run, no cards left to play. "It's over," Samuel said quietly. "For real this time, Harlan. It's over." Harlan looked around the circle of faces, people he'd grown up with, worked alongside, controlled for years, saw only judgment and anger staring back. Something in his expression crumbled. the mask of confidence finally shattering. "You'll die without me," he said, but the conviction was gone. "Winter will kill you all." "Maybe," Cade said, wiping blood from his face. "But at least we'll die free." They bound Harlan with rope and chains, taking no chances this time. Posted 6 guards on him, men who'd lost supplies in the fire and had personal reasons to ensure he didn't escape again. He sat in the dirt, defeated and diminished, the architect of Iron Ridge's near destruction reduced to just another prisoner. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctant to leave, needing to see their tormentor truly contained before they could believe it. Cade collapsed against the well, every injury announcing itself with renewed enthusiasm. Rachel sat beside him, still holding the sack of poison like it might explode. "That was possibly the stupidest thing I've ever seen," she said. "Heard that before, too." "And the bravest." "That's new." She smiled, exhausted and relieved. "What happens now?" Cade looked at the smoldering ruins of the depot, the collapsed grain store, the frightened faces of people trying to calculate whether survival was even possible, looked at the stars, cold and distant, witnessing without caring. "Now?" He pulled himself to his feet with a groan. Now comes the hard part. Behind them, one of Harlan's guards suddenly shouted a warning. Cade turned just in time to see Harlan lunge forward, somehow having slipped one hand free of the bindings. The man moved with the desperate speed of someone with nothing left to lose, grabbed a guard's rifle, spun. The shot echoed across Iron Ridge like thunder. Harlan stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. The rifle fell from his hands. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, looked up at Samuel, who stood with a smoking pistol. "I'm sorry," Samuel said, voice breaking. "I'm sorry it came to this." Harlan opened his mouth, but only blood came out. He fell forward, hit the ground, and didn't move again. Silence. Absolute and crushing. Then someone was checking for a pulse, confirming what everyone already knew. Harlan Briggs was dead, killed by the town elder he'd tried to supplant, dying in the dirt of the town his family had built. The irony was savage. Samuel stood shaking, the pistol hanging loose in his hand. "He was going for the well, going to shoot the sack in Rachel's hands, poison us all out of spite. I couldn't let him." "You did what you had to." Eli took the pistol gently from Samuel's trembling grip. "What any of us would have done." But Samuel looked like he'd aged a decade in a moment. The weight of taking a life, even a life like Harlan's, settling onto shoulders already burdened with impossible choices. Cade understood. He'd carried that weight before, knew how it never really left you. They covered Harlan's body with a blanket, posted guards anyway out of habit and paranoia. Tomorrow, they'd bury him. Tonight there were more immediate concerns, like the fact that their supplies were still gone, winter was still coming, and the man they'd relied on for leadership, however corrupt, was dead. Iron Ridge stood at the precipice, and the question wasn't whether they'd fall. It was whether anyone would be left to remember them when they did. The night crawled toward dawn with the inevitability of a funeral procession. Cade sat on the steps of the meeting hall, watching Iron Ridge breathe in the darkness. Smoke still rising from the ruins, guards changing shifts with exhausted efficiency, the weight of what they'd lost settling like frost on every surface. Samuel emerged from inside, moving like a man 20 years older than he'd been yesterday. He lowered himself onto the step beside Cade with a grunt of pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. "First man I ever killed," Samuel said quietly. 63 years on this earth, and I'd never taken a life until tonight. You saved lives. That's what matters." "Does it?" Samuel's voice was hollow. "I keep seeing his face, keep thinking about his grandfather, who taught me to ride, his father, who helped build my first barn. All that history, all those connections, ended because I pulled a trigger." Cade had no comfort to offer, so he offered truth instead. "Good men die every day without anyone remembering them. Harlan tried to destroy this town and nearly succeeded. History doesn't erase that just because his family planted roots here first." "No, but it doesn't make the weight lighter either." They sat in silence, 2 men carrying different but equally heavy burdens, watching the sky begin its slow shift from black to gray. "We need to take inventory," Samuel said eventually, pulling himself back to the immediate. "Figure out exactly what we have left, how long it can last, what our options are." "Already did the math. It's bad." "How bad?" The depot had maybe 60% of our winter supplies. The grain store had another 30. What's left in people's homes and the remaining storage buildings might cover 10%. Kate had spent the dark hours calculating, recalculating, hoping the numbers would change. They hadn't. We've got enough food to feed the town for maybe 3 weeks. 4 if we ration hard and get lucky with hunting. Samuel absorbed this with the stoicism of someone who'd known the answer would be terrible. And winter hits full force in 6 weeks. Give or take. So we're dead. Just a matter of when. We're dead if we stay. Samuel turned to look at him. You're suggesting we abandon Iron Ridge? I'm suggesting we accept reality. This town can't sustain its current population through winter, not with what's left. So either people leave voluntarily now or they die slowly later. Where would they go? Most families here don't have resources to relocate. They sunk everything into Iron Ridge. Cheyenne, Laramie, Denver, for those willing to travel. Anywhere with established infrastructure and surplus supplies. Cade met Samuel's gaze. I know what I'm suggesting. I know what it means, the end of everything your generation built. But between pride and survival, I'll pick survival every time. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ruins of the depot. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. And what about those who refuse to leave? Because some will. Some would rather die in their homes than abandon them. Oh, then they die in their homes. That's cold. That's frontier logic. You taught it to your kids, probably. The land doesn't care about your feelings. Neither does winter. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not one that works. Cade stood, joints protesting. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can make the choice easier. Organize a convoy. Pool resources for those who leave. Give them the best possible chance to start over somewhere new. That's more than most frontier towns offer when they collapse. Samuel looked up at him, and in his eyes Cade saw the terrible understanding of a leader who'd run out of good options. You really think we're done? That there's no saving Iron Ridge? I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not about saving the town, it's about saving the people. The buildings don't matter, the name doesn't matter. What matters is whether the families who call this home see next spring. When did you become such a philosopher? When I stopped running from hard truths. The sky was definitely lighter now, the darkness retreating toward the western horizon. Soon the sun would rise on Iron Ridge's first morning without Harlan Briggs, and the town would have to face what came next without the man who'd controlled it for 15 years. Rachel appeared from the direction of the well, carrying a bucket of fresh water. She'd been helping tend to the guards Harlan had knocked unconscious. All 3 had survived, though one had a concussion that Doc Morrison was monitoring. She poured water into cups, handed them to Cade and Samuel. Town's starting to wake up, she reported. People are gathering at the meeting hall. They want answers. Don't have any good ones, Samuel admitted. Then give them the bad ones. They're adults. They can handle truth. Can they? Samuel sipped his water, grimaced. Truth is, their town is dying and their leader just got shot. Truth is winter's coming and we don't have food to survive it. Truth is we might have to scatter to the 4 winds just to see spring. That's a lot of truth for one morning. Better than lies. Rachel's voice was firm. Harlan spent months lying to us, manipulating us, destroying us from within while pretending to protect us. I'll take painful truth over comfortable lies every single time. Cade found himself liking her more with every conversation. She had her father's honesty, but without the weight of years tempering it into resignation. She still believed truth mattered, that doing right was worth the cost. He hoped the frontier didn't grind that out of her the way it had ground so much else out of him. By the time the sun crested the mountains, over 100 people had gathered. Every adult in Iron Ridge, near enough. They filled the meeting hall and spilled out onto the street, faces haggard from a sleepless night, eyes demanding answers. Samuel stood on the hall's front steps, Eli Winters on one side, Cade on the other. The council had formally dissolved itself an hour earlier. The other 3 members had resigned, claiming they couldn't lead after enabling Harlan's corruption. That left Samuel and Eli as the town's de facto leadership, a role neither wanted but both accepted. Most of you know what happened last night, Samuel began, voice carrying in the cold morning air. For those who don't, Harlan Briggs destroyed our supply depot and grain store. He tried to poison our last well. When we stopped him, he attempted to kill us all out of spite. I shot him. He's dead. No gasps, no outcry. They'd already heard, of course. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when that news involved death and destruction. What you might not know is the full extent of what we've lost. The depot held roughly 60% of our winter supplies. The grain store held another 30%. Combined, we've lost everything we needed to survive the cold months. Samuel paused, letting that sink in. Cade Mercer has done the calculations. With what remains, we have maybe 3 weeks of food, 4 if we're extremely careful and fortunate with hunting. Now came the gasps, the muttered curses, the dawning horror of people realizing they were staring at starvation. "That's not enough," someone called out. "Winter lasts 4 or 5 months out here. How are we supposed to—" "You can't," Cade interrupted, stepping forward. "That's the point. Iron Ridge cannot sustain its current population through winter. Not anymore. So we have a choice to make, and we have to make it now." "What choice?" demanded Marcus Callahan. "Stay or go. Those who stay will be gambling that we can acquire enough supplies before the deep freeze hits. That means sending wagons to Cheyenne, to Laramie, to every town within 2 weeks' travel, begging or buying whatever they can spare. It means hunting every day, preserving every scrap of meat, rationing food to near starvation levels. It means some of us won't make it, no matter how hard we try." Cade swept his gaze across the crowd. "Those who go will leave with whatever resources we can pool together, head to established towns that can absorb new residents, start over somewhere safer. It's not ideal, but it's survival." "You're asking us to abandon our homes?" A woman Cade didn't know, face twisted with outrage. "To just give up everything we've built? I'm asking you to choose between pride and life. This is our town. This is a collection of buildings. You're the town, and buildings can be rebuilt. Families can't be resurrected." The crowd erupted, some agreeing, more arguing, everyone talking over each other in a cacophony of fear and anger and grief. Samuel let it continue for a full minute before raising his hands for silence. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, voice cutting through the chaos. "Today, we inventory everything, every scrap of food, every tool, every resource we have left. Tomorrow, we organize. Those who want to leave, we help them prepare. Those who want to stay, we help them survive. No judgment either way. No shame in choosing life over land. And if we all choose to stay, Eli's neighbor, a rancher named Thomas, what then? Then we fight winter together and hope it's enough." Samuel's expression was grim. "But I won't lie to you, the odds aren't good. We'd need miracles and luck in equal measure, and we're fresh out of both." "We've survived hard times before," Thomas argued. "The drought of '68, the fever outbreak in '71. We're tougher than those times. We had Harlan's resources to fall back on," Samuel interrupted. "His grain stores, his cattle, his money to buy what we couldn't grow. We don't have that anymore. We're on our own, truly on our own, for the first time since Iron Ridge was founded." The weight of that reality settled over the crowd like a shroud. For 15 years, Harlan had been their safety net, however corrupt. Without him, they were adrift. "I'm staying," said a voice from the back. Old Man Peters, a veteran of some war Cade didn't know. "Spent 40 years on my land. I'll be damned if I let Winter or Harlan's ghost run me off." "I'm staying too." The baker, a stout woman with flour permanently under her fingernails. "Got nowhere else to go anyway." One by one, people spoke up, some declaring they'd stay, others admitting they had to leave, all of them scared but trying to face it with whatever courage they could muster. Cade watched the fracturing of a community, the painful mathematics of survival, making people choose between neighbors and family, between hope and pragmatism. It was brutal. It was necessary. It was the frontier in its rawest form. "Those who stay will need leadership," Eli said, addressing the crowd. "The council's dissolved. We need someone willing to organize, to make hard decisions, to coordinate our survival efforts." He turned to look at Cade. "I nominate Cade Mercer." The silence was absolute. "What?" Cade stared at him. "No, absolutely not. You've proven yourself capable. You exposed Harlan when no one else would. You stopped him from poisoning the well. You're the only one here who sees situations clearly enough to navigate them. I'm also a drifter who arrived 2 weeks ago. I don't have roots here, don't have history." "Exactly," Samuel cut him off. "Which means you don't have the blind spots the rest of us carry. You can make decisions based on what's right, not on who your cousin married or which family helped yours 30 years ago. That's what we need right now. I don't want this. Neither did I when I first joined the council. Samuel's voice softened. But leadership isn't about what you want. It's about what's needed. And right now, Iron Ridge needs someone willing to tell hard truths and make harder choices. That's you. Cade looked at the faces staring at him, the same faces that had wanted him gone a week ago, that had called him cursed and saboteur, and worse. Now they looked at him with something approaching hope, or at least desperate faith that anyone was better than no one. All in favor of Cade Mercer leading our survival efforts, speak now, Eli called out. The ayes outnumbered the nays 3-1. Not unanimous, but clear enough. Democracy in action, or at least frontier approximation of it. Cade felt the weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than exhaustion, heavier than his injuries. Leadership. Responsibility. The knowledge that his decisions would determine who lived and who died. Fine, he said, because what else could he say? But we do this my way. No arguments, no committee debates, no second-guessing every choice. If I say jump, you jump. If I say ration, you ration. If I say we need to do something you don't like, you do it anyway and complain later. We clear? Murmurs of agreement, some reluctant, most understanding the necessity of unified command in crisis. Good. Then here's the plan. Cade's mind was already working, organizing, prioritizing. First, inventory. I want to know every ounce of food, every gallon of water, every resource we have. Rachel, you and your father handle that. Get volunteers, be thorough, report back by sundown. Rachel nodded, already making mental lists. Second, convoy preparation. Those leaving need to go soon, before weather makes travel impossible. Samuel, you organize that. Figure out who's going, pool resources, arrange for wagons and supplies. They leave in 3 days. 3 days? Samuel's eyebrows rose. That's not much time. It's all the time we have. Every day they delay is a day closer to snow. Move fast or don't move at all. Samuel nodded, understanding. Third, immediate survival. We need hunters out today bringing back whatever they can kill. We need fishing parties at the creek. We need every possible food source identified and exploited. Marcus, you and your brothers handle hunting. You know the hills better than anyone. Marcus Callahan straightened, accepting the responsibility. We'll bring back meat. Fourth, fortification. Whatever buildings we can't defend or don't need, we strip for materials and firewood. Consolidate the population into defensible structures that can be heated efficiently. Thomas, you're a builder. Make it happen. On it. Fifth, security. We still have Harlan's men out there somewhere. Some of them might be loyal enough to cause trouble. And winter brings other dangers. Wolves, raiders, desperate people from dying towns. We need watches, patrols, a defense plan. Doc Morrison, I know you're a doctor, but Rachel mentioned you were a soldier, true? The old doctor straightened despite his years. Cavalry. 20 years before I hung up the sword. Then dust it off. You're in charge of security. Orders given, responsibilities assigned, the machinery of organized survival starting to turn. The crowd dispersed with purpose now, something to do besides panic. Cade stood on the steps watching them go, feeling the weight of every decision he'd just made. Any of them could be wrong, all of them could fail. But paralysis was guaranteed death. Action at least gave them a chance. You're good at this, Eli observed, standing beside him. At giving orders? Anyone can do that. At giving orders, people follow. That's rarer. Eli clasped his shoulder. Thank you. For not running when you could have. For staying when we gave you every reason to leave. Thank me when we survive winter. Fair enough. The day unfolded in organized chaos. Rachel's inventory teams fanned through town, counting and recording. Samuel's convoy group gathered in the meeting hall, making painful decisions about who stayed and who left. Marcus and his brothers rode out armed and determined. Thomas pulled together a work crew and began the brutal task of dismantling the buildings too damaged to save. Cade moved between groups, overseeing, adjusting, solving problems as they arose. A dispute over food distribution. He settled it by instituting strict rationing for everyone. no exceptions. A question about whether children should be sent away even if their parents stayed, he left that to individual families, refusing to separate people against their will. A concern about whether they had enough ammunition for both hunting and defense. He organized a night watch rotation that minimized exposure while maximizing coverage. Problems, solutions, compromises. The endless calculus of keeping people alive. By midday, Rachel found him near the well, reviewing her preliminary inventory numbers. Her face told him the news wasn't good before she spoke. "It's worse than you thought," she said without preamble. "A lot of people hoarded more than they admitted. Personal stores that should have gone to the depot. We've got maybe 10 days of food, not 3 weeks, and that's with severe rationing." Kate absorbed this, recalculating. 10 days. The convoy needed 3 to prepare, would take 4 days to reach Cheyenne, optimistically 3 days to organize supplies and return. That was 10 days minimum, assuming perfect conditions and no delays. They'd be out of food before help arrived. "Don't tell anyone yet," he said. "We've got enough panic as it is." "You're going to lie to them?" "I'm going to give them time to work the problem before they know how bad it is. Hunters might bring back more than expected. Fishing might prove fruitful. We might find wild stores we haven't accessed." He met her eyes. "Or we might not. But crushing hope serves no purpose until we know for certain there isn't any." Rachel looked troubled, but nodded. "My father wouldn't approve of this approach." "Your father's an honest man in a world that punishes honesty. I'm a pragmatist in a world that requires it." Cade folded the inventory papers, tucked them away. Sometimes leadership means carrying knowledge others can't handle. Sometimes it means lying to keep people functional. "I'll take that burden if it means more people survive." "And if they find out you lied?" "Then they'll hate me. Won't be the first time." He started walking toward where Thomas's crew was working. "How's the convoy preparation going?" Rachel fell into step beside him. 40 people are leaving, mostly families with young children, elderly who can't handle harsh conditions, anyone with relatives in other towns who can take them in. Samuel's organizing 3 wagons, pooling enough supplies to get them to Cheyenne safely. 40 people. Out of Iron Ridge's population of roughly 130, that was nearly a third. The town was hemorrhaging population, and who could blame them? Staying meant gambling on long odds and harsh conditions. "The ones staying," Kate asked, "what's their demographic?" "Mostly ranchers, some farmers, people with too much invested in their land to abandon it. Stubborn old bastards who'd rather die than admit defeat." She smiled slightly. "People like my father." "He's staying?" "Of course he's staying. He helped found this town. He's not leaving unless someone drags him out in chains." Her smile faded. "I'm staying too, before you ask." "Wasn't going to." "Really? Most people tell me I should go, that a young woman has better prospects in a city than dying in a frontier town." "Most people underestimate young women." Cade glanced at her. "You've proven yourself capable, intelligent, and braver than half the men here. We need that. I need that. If I'm supposed to lead this desperate attempt at survival." She looked surprised, then pleased, then embarrassed by being pleased. "Well, thank you." They reached Thomas's worksite, where crews were systematically dismantling the buildings too damaged to save. The grain store was being pulled apart beam by beam, the wood salvaged for firewood and repairs. The depot's stone foundation was being harvested for building material. Even in destruction, the frontier wasted nothing. "How long until we've consolidated into defensible structures?" Kate asked Thomas. The builder wiped sweat despite the cold, surveyed his work. 3 days, maybe 4. We're converting the church, the meeting hall, and 6 of the sturdiest homes into communal living spaces. Tight quarters, but defensible and heat efficient. Everyone who stays gets a bunk and a share of the warmth. "Make it 3 days." "We can't afford 4. Thomas nodded, turned back to his crew, started shouting orders with renewed urgency. The afternoon wore on. Marcus returned with the first hunting party. 3 deer, 2 rabbits, a bounty that would feed the town for maybe 2 days if butchered and preserved correctly. Not enough, but something. Proof that effort mattered. The fishing parties had less luck, the creek was running low, fish scarce, but they'd return tomorrow, try again, keep trying until they succeeded or exhausted the possibility. By sunset, the inventory was complete. Rachel presented the final numbers to Cade privately, away from ears that might panic. 10 days of food confirmed. Less if hunting failed. More if they got lucky. Water was secure, the well was clean and deep. Would last through winter barring sabotage or catastrophe. Firewood was the real problem. They had enough for maybe 6 weeks of heating the consolidated structures. After that, they'd be burning furniture, then structural supports, then freezing. The mathematics were brutal. They could survive on food until the convoy returned with supplies, probably. They could survive on water indefinitely. But heat was the real killer. Without it, winter would murder them long before starvation could. "We need more firewood," Cade said, stating the obvious. "There's timber in the hills, but cutting and hauling in winter conditions." Rachel trailed off, the impossibility clear. "So we start now. Today, every able-bodied person not assigned to other tasks becomes a woodcutter. We harvest every tree within practical range, process it, stack it, store it. Work from dawn to dusk, sleep, repeat. People are already exhausted. Then they'll be more exhausted, better tired than frozen." Cade stood, began walking toward the meeting hall. "Call everyone together. Time for an evening briefing." The meeting hall was packed again, people gathering for news and direction. Cade stood before them, dirty and tired and probably looking like hell, but projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Here's where we stand," he began. "The inventory is complete. We have enough food for approximately 2 weeks if we ration strictly. Water is secure. Shelter is being consolidated. Hunting and fishing efforts are ongoing." Relief rippled through the crowd. 2 weeks sounded survivable. It was optimistic, but survivable. Cade didn't mention that 2 weeks assumed perfect rationing and successful hunts. Didn't mention the firewood crisis. Gave them hope because hope kept people functional. He hated himself a little for the deception, but leadership required it. "The convoy leaves day after tomorrow at dawn," he continued. "Those going, make your peace with those staying. It'll be months before travel is safe again. Those staying, understand what you're committing to. Hard work, harsh conditions, and no guarantee of success." "What do you need from us?" someone called out. "Everything. Every ounce of effort, every bit of cooperation, every sacrifice you're capable of making. We're about to attempt something that by all logic should fail. Our only advantage is that we're desperate, and desperate people can accomplish impossible things when they work together." He laid out the next day's assignments. More hunting, more fishing, and the new priority, timber harvesting. Crews would work in shifts, maximizing daylight, bringing back as much wood as humanly possible. "This is going to be brutal," Cade said honestly. "Some of you won't make it. That's the truth. And I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. But some of us will make it. And those who do will have earned the right to call themselves survivors of the worst winter Iron Ridge ever faced." It wasn't an inspiring speech. It wasn't meant to be. Inspiration was cheap. What they needed was realistic assessment and grim determination. "Get some sleep," he finished. "Tomorrow, we start fighting for real." The crowd dispersed quietly, sobered but not defeated. Cade watched them go, feeling the weight of every life now depending on his decisions. Samuel approached, moving slow and tired. "That was well done. Honest without being crushing." "I lied about the food numbers." "I know. Rachel told me." Samuel didn't look angry. "But you gave them enough truth to prepare and enough hope to keep working. That's leadership. That's manipulation. Sometimes they're the same thing." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "You're doing fine, Cade. Better than fine. You're giving us a chance. That's all anyone can ask." Cade wasn't sure he agreed, but he nodded anyway. That night, lying in a borrowed bunk in one of the consolidated houses, surrounded by the sounds of sleeping strangers, Cade stared at the ceiling and did the math again. 10 days of food, 6 weeks of heat. A convoy that would take minimum 10 days to return, optimistically. Weather that could turn deadly any moment. People who were already exhausted being asked to work themselves to collapse. The odds were terrible. But he'd faced terrible odds before, had survived when survival seemed impossible, had learned that the difference between living and dying often came down to pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Iron Ridge would survive or it wouldn't, but it would go down fighting, and that was something. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would demand everything he had and more. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. Winter had arrived, and the real fight was just beginning. The snow fell soft and deadly, like a promise whispered by something that didn't care whether you lived or died. Cade woke to white light filtering through gaps in the shutters, the kind of brightness that meant accumulation. He rose quietly, not wanting to disturb the dozen others sleeping in the converted meeting hall, and moved to the window. 3 inches already, and the sky looked pregnant with more. The convoy was supposed to leave today. He found Samuel in the kitchen area, boiling coffee over a fire that was smaller than it should be, already conserving fuel. The old man looked like he hadn't slept, bags under his eyes deep enough to carry water. "Snow changes things," Samuel said without preamble. "Doesn't change what needs doing, just makes it harder." The convoy leaves today as planned. 3 inches isn't enough to stop wagons, and waiting means risking 10 inches tomorrow. Cade accepted a cup of coffee, the heat painful and welcome against his cold hands. "They go now or they don't go at all." Samuel nodded slowly. "You know, some of them won't make it back." "I know." Cade sipped the coffee, bitter and strong. "But all of them dying here isn't better. At least this way, some survive." Cold calculus. Survival usually is. They stood in silence, watching the snow fall, 2 men making decisions that would determine who lived and who died, carrying that weight because someone had to. By dawn, the convoy was assembled in the town square. 3 wagons loaded with what supplies could be spared. 40 people bundled against the cold, saying goodbyes that felt too much like funerals. Children cried. Adults tried not to. The mathematics of separation played out in quiet tears and forced smiles. Cade addressed them briefly. No grand speeches, just practical guidance. Follow the freight route. Stay together. If the snow gets worse, hole up and wait it out. Better late than frozen. When you reach Cheyenne, find Marshal Davidson. Tell him what happened here. Tell him we need supplies and law. He's a good man. He'll help. What if he can't? One of the departing families asked. What if Cheyenne doesn't have surplus to spare? Then you stay there and build a new life. Don't come back to Iron Ridge unless you're bringing help. This town can't support refugees returning empty-handed. Harsh words. True words. The frontier didn't reward sentiment. The wagons pulled out as the sun broke through the clouds, wheels cutting tracks in the fresh snow. People waved until the convoy disappeared around the bend, then slowly turned back to face what remained. A half-empty town, dwindling supplies, and winter settling in like an occupying army. "All right," Cade called out, voice carrying across the diminished crowd. "Crying time's over. Working time starts now. Hunters, you're heading north to the deer runs. Fishers, try downstream where the water's deeper. Woodcutters, we need 3 cords minimum today. Everyone else, food preservation, structural repairs, whatever needs doing, move." They moved. Not enthusiastically, but they moved. That was enough. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion and small victories. Hunters brought back meat. Not enough, never enough, but something. Woodcutters felled trees in the hills, hauled logs through snow that deepened daily, stacked them with hands gone numb and backs screaming protest. The town consolidated further, abandoning all but the 4 sturdiest buildings, huddling together for warmth and efficiency. Cade slept maybe 4 hours a night, spending the rest organizing, troubleshooting, pushing people past what they thought they could endure. He settled disputes over rations, made calls about who worked where, decided which tasks mattered and which were luxuries they couldn't afford. Leadership, he learned, was mostly about making everyone equally unhappy with your decisions while keeping them too busy to complain. 5 days after the convoy left, the real storm hit. It came out of the north like the wrath of something ancient and hungry, wind howling between buildings, snow falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. The world became white chaos. "Everyone inside!" Cade shouted over the wind. "Seal the doors, bank the fires, nobody goes out for any reason." They crowded into the meeting hall and church, 90 people pressed together, burning precious fuel to keep the cold at bay. The storm raged for 3 days. 3 days of howling wind and creaking timbers and wondering if the buildings would hold. 3 days of rationing food into portions that left everyone hungry. 3 days of children crying and adults trying to stay strong, and the slow grinding realization that this was just the beginning. On the third night, with the storm still screaming outside, someone started coughing, then someone else, then 5 more. Cade found Doc Morrison in the church, examining a young boy whose lungs sounded like rocks grinding together. Pneumonia? Cade asked quietly. Probably. Hard to tell without proper equipment. Doc Morrison looked old and tired and worried. Cold, stress, close quarters, perfect conditions for it to spread. We need medicine. Don't have medicine, used most of it treating injuries from the fires. Then we need to keep them warm, isolated if possible, hydrated. The doctor's hands shook slightly as he packed his bag, and we pray it doesn't spread further. But it did spread. By morning, 12 people were sick. By evening, 20. The coughing echoed through the cramped spaces like percussion keeping time with death. Cade gathered the healthy adults, laid out the situation with brutal honesty. We've got a sickness spreading. Doc says it's probably pneumonia. Without medicine, some of these people will die, maybe all of them. The convoy, someone said. If they bring back medicine, they won't be back for at least another week, optimistically. Cade cut off that hope before it could take root. We need solutions we can implement now with what we have. What do you suggest? Rachel asked. She looked exhausted, having spent the last 2 days helping Doc Morrison tend the sick. Isolation. We separate the sick from the healthy, minimize contact, slow the spread. Cade pulled out a rough map he'd drawn of the town. The schoolhouse is empty. We convert it to a sick ward. Move everyone showing symptoms there, give them the best care we can, keep them away from the uninfected. That's a death sentence, Eli protested. The schoolhouse isn't insulated properly. They'll freeze. They'll freeze here too, while infecting everyone else. At least isolated, we limit the damage. You're talking about abandoning them. I'm talking about saving who we can. Cade met Eli's eyes. You want me to make comfortable choices or effective ones? Because I can't do both. The silence was heavy with judgment and reluctant understanding. I'll go with them, Doc Morrison said quietly. Set up the ward, provide what care I can. Someone needs to. You'll get sick too, Rachel protested. Probably. But I'm old and half useful anyway. Better I risk it than someone young with decades left. He stood, gathering his meager supplies. Help me move the patients. Carefully. We don't want to worsen their condition. They spent the next hours converting the schoolhouse into a hospital, a grim procession through snow that had finally stopped falling. 23 sick people, 1 elderly doctor, and supplies that wouldn't last a week. Cade helped carry patients, saw the fear in their eyes, the knowledge that isolation meant abandonment in all but name. You're doing the right thing, Samuel said, walking beside him. Hard, but right. Doesn't feel right. It never does. That's how you know it matters. With the sick isolated, the remaining healthy population, 67 people, returned to the desperate work of survival. The storm had buried their wood supplies, making every log a battle to uncover and haul. Hunting was impossible in the deep snow. Fishing meant chopping through ice that grew thicker daily. They were losing. Cade could see it in the faces around him, the slow erosion of hope. Could feel it in the tightening of belts, the rationing of rations, the conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. They were scared. They were dying. And they were starting to wonder if he'd led them wrong. On the 8th day after the convoy's departure, Marcus Callahan approached him with 3 of his brothers. They looked angry and desperate in equal measure. We need to talk, Marcus said. So talk. People are saying you lied about the food supplies, that we had less than you claimed when you took charge. No point denying it. True. We had 10 days instead of 3 weeks. You lied to us. I gave you hope while we worked the problem. Would truth have helped? Would knowing we were doomed have made anyone work harder, hunt better, survive longer? Marcus's jaw clenched. We trusted you. You needed leadership. I provided it. Trust is luxury goods. We're operating on necessities only. Some people think you should step down. Let someone else lead. Who? You? Cade gestured to the brothers. Any of you want this job? Want to decide who eats and who doesn't, who works and who rests, who lives and who dies? Because I'm happy to hand it over. Just tell me who's volunteering. Silence. No one met his eyes. That's what I thought. Cade's voice was tired but firm. I'm not a good leader. I'm not even a good person. But I'm the only one willing to make the calls that need making. So until someone better steps up, you're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you. We can fight about it, or we can survive. Your choice. Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but no more lies. Can't promise that, but I promise every lie will be in service of keeping you alive. Cade turned back to the work schedule he'd been planning. Now get back to the wood detail. We're burning through fuel faster than we're harvesting it. The brothers left, and Cade allowed himself a moment of weakness, leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, felt the weight of it all trying to crush him. That was well handled, Rachel's voice from the doorway. That was disaster narrowly averted. Same thing out here. She moved to stand beside him. They're scared. People lash out when they're scared. I know, doesn't make it easier. Nothing about this is easy. She handed him a small portion of dried meat, his ration for the evening. But we're still alive, that counts for something. Did it? Cade wasn't sure anymore. Survival for its own sake felt empty when survival was all there was, but he ate the meat anyway because quitting wasn't an option. On the 10th day, a shout went up from the eastern perimeter. Riders! Riders coming! Cade grabbed a rifle and ran, heart pounding. Too soon for the convoy. Could be raiders. Could be desperate refugees from another town. Could be anything. He reached the edge of town as 3 horsemen emerged from the snow, wrapped in furs, faces wind-burned. One of them raised a hand in greeting. We're looking for Iron Ridge, the lead rider called out. This it? What's left of it? Cade responded, rifle lowered but ready. Who's asking? Name's Cooper, marshal out of Laramie. Got word from some folks passing through about troubles here. Thought we'd ride over, see if you needed help. Help. The word sounded foreign, like something from a language Cade had forgotten. Depends what kind of help you're offering, he said cautiously. Cooper dismounted, moved forward with the careful posture of someone who understood frontier protocols. The kind that involves supplies. We had a good harvest this year, got surplus. Your people reached our town 2 days ago, told us what happened. We loaded up wagons, started them your direction. Should arrive in maybe 4 or 5 days, depending on the weather. Wagons. Cade felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. How many? 3. Food, medicine, blankets, tools, everything we could spare and still maintain our own winter stocks. Cooper looked around at what remained of Iron Ridge, his expression sympathetic. Heard you had some trouble with leadership gone wrong. Sorry about that. Frontier's hard enough without corruption making it worse. We're managing. I can see that. Town's not dead yet. That's impressive given what you've lost. Cooper pulled out a map, unfolded it. The wagons are following the freight route, moving slow because of the loads. If you've got able-bodied folks, sending a team to meet them and help with the final push would speed things up. Cade's mind was already working, calculating. 4 days to wait, another day to organize and meet the wagons, call it 5 days total. They could stretch their supplies that far. Barely, but possible. We'll send people, he said. And Marshal, thank you. This town needed a miracle. You might have just provided it. Cooper smiled, brief and genuine. We're all out here together. When one town falls, it weakens us all. When one survives, we all get stronger. He remounted his horse. We'll ride back and make sure those wagons keep moving. You just keep your people alive until they get here. The 3 riders left as quickly as they'd arrived, disappearing back into the white landscape. Cade stood staring after them, feeling something he'd almost forgotten. Not quite hope. Hope was still too dangerous, but possibility. The chance that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually pull this off. He turned back to town, found the population gathered and watching. They'd heard. They knew. The convoy made it to Laramie, Cade announced. Help is coming. Food, medicine, supplies. 5 days out, give or take. The reaction was immediate. Cheering, crying, people embracing like they'd been given pardons from execution, which, in a sense, they had. But, Cade raised his voice over the celebration, we're not saved yet. We still have to last 5 more days. We still have sick people who need medicine we don't have yet. We still have work to do, so celebrate tonight, then get back to it tomorrow. We're not done fighting. But the mood had shifted, undeniable and powerful. They'd been given permission to believe again, and that changed everything. That night, they shared a communal meal in the meeting hall, tiny portions that still didn't fill anyone, but eaten together with something approaching joy. Someone produced a harmonica. Someone else started singing. The sound filled the space, pushed back the darkness and cold, reminded everyone that they were alive and human and capable of more than just suffering. Cade sat in a corner, watching, feeling separate from the celebration despite having orchestrated their survival. Rachel found him, sat down without invitation. "You should be celebrating too," she said. "I'll celebrate when everyone's actually safe." "That's weeks away, maybe months. You planning to be miserable until spring? Planning to stay vigilant until the crisis passes?" She studied him with those creek-water eyes, seeing more than he wanted to show. "You don't know how to stop fighting, do you? Even when you've won." "Haven't won yet." "Cade." She waited until he looked at her. "You saved this town. You exposed Harlan. You organized us when we were falling apart. You made decisions nobody else wanted to make, took responsibility nobody else wanted to carry. You won. It's okay to acknowledge that." Had he won? Cade thought about the people who'd left, the sick isolated in the schoolhouse, the supplies burned, the winter still ahead. Thought about all the ways this could still go wrong, all the threats still looming. But he also thought about the 90 people who'd been in Iron Ridge when he arrived, and the 67 who remained, exhausted, scared but alive. Thought about the convoy that had made it to safety. Thought about help coming because someone had believed them worth saving. "Maybe," he said, "maybe we won." Rachel smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence while around them the celebration continued. The next 5 days were the hardest yet, knowing rescue was coming but not here, fighting to survive long enough to receive it. 2 more people fell sick. The firewood ran critically low. A storage shed collapsed under snow weight, destroying precious supplies. But they endured. Cade drove them mercilessly, extracting every ounce of effort, pushing past exhaustion into something beyond it. He organized rotating work crews, maximized efficiency, made hard calls about resource allocation. When people complained, he listened. When they demanded changes, he considered them. When they threatened mutiny, he reminded them that dying together was still dying. On the 15th day after the convoy's departure, scouts spotted the wagons. 3 massive loads pulled by teams of oxen, crawling through snow and cold but moving steadily. Beside them rode escorts from Laramie, ensuring safe passage. Behind them followed some of the original convoy, returning with proof they'd succeeded. Iron Ridge emptied itself, everyone who could walk trudging through snow to meet the wagons. They arrived like salvation, food, medicine, blankets, tools, everything they'd needed and more. The town swarmed them, unloading with desperate efficiency, carrying supplies back to storage, rationing forgotten in the face of abundance. Doc Morrison received the medicine and nearly wept. He rushed back to the schoolhouse with volunteers, began treating the sick with actual remedies instead of hope and warm blankets. Within hours, the worst cases began stabilizing. Within days, most would recover. That night, they held a proper celebration. Food enough to actually satisfy hunger, warmth enough to stop shivering, the knowledge that they'd survived what should have killed them. Samuel found Cade near the bonfire they'd built in the town square, the first time in weeks they could afford to waste fuel on something besides survival. "You did it," Samuel said simply. "You kept us alive. We did it. Everyone. I just gave orders." "You gave more than that. You gave us someone to believe in when we'd lost faith in ourselves." Samuel clasped his shoulder. "This town owes you a debt we can never repay. Don't want payment, just want to see spring. You will, we all will, thanks to you." The crowd was chanting something, Cade realized. His name. They were chanting his name, calling for him to speak. He didn't want to speak, didn't want recognition or celebration, just wanted to be left alone to process the fact that somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. But leadership meant giving people what they needed, not what you wanted. He stood, faced the crowd, saw the faces illuminated by firelight, grateful, exhausted, alive. "I'm not good with speeches," he began, and they laughed. "But I'll say this. 3 weeks ago, this town was dying. Harlan Briggs had destroyed our supplies, poisoned our trust, left us with nothing but fear and suspicion. You could have turned on each other, could have scattered to the winds, could have given up. He paused, making eye contact with individuals. You didn't. You chose to fight. You chose to work together. You chose to trust a stranger who gave you every reason not to. That's not my victory. That's yours. I just kept you organized while you did the impossible. Applause, genuine and warm. Winter's not over, Cade continued. We've got months of cold ahead, but we've got supplies now. We've got each other. We've got proof that we can survive anything if we refuse to quit. So that's what we'll do. We'll survive. We'll rebuild. We'll make Iron Ridge stronger than it ever was under Harlan's corruption. More applause, people shouting agreement. And when spring comes, Cade finished, voice carrying across the square, when the snow melts and the world thaws and life returns to this land, we'll know we earned it. We'll know we fought for every single day. We'll know that sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning, it's refusing to accept defeat. The celebration went late into the night. The first real joy Iron Ridge had known in months. Cade participated, accepted congratulations, shook hands until his arm ached. But eventually he slipped away, needing quiet and solitude to process everything. He found himself at Harlan's grave, a simple marker on the edge of town, no grand monument, just acknowledgement of a life ended. Someone had placed a stone on the grave, frontier tradition for remembering the dead. You were wrong, Cade said to the frozen ground. You thought you could control everything through fear and destruction. Thought people needed a strong hand to survive. But they didn't need control. They needed community. They didn't need a tyrant. They needed each other. The grave didn't answer, but Cade hadn't expected it to. I'm not staying, he continued, surprising himself with the admission. Once spring comes, once this town's stable, I'm leaving. This was never supposed to be my home. I was just passing through. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. Wondered if Iron Ridge hadn't already claimed him, the way frontier towns claimed everyone who stopped long enough to put down roots. Talking to the dead? Rachel's voice, from behind him. Seems safer than talking to the living. Dead don't argue back. She moved to stand beside him, looking down at Harlan's grave. Think he knew, at the end, that he'd lost? I think he knew. I think that's why he went so hard trying to burn everything. Better to destroy what you can't control than watch someone else succeed with it. That's sad. That's human. Cade turned away from the grave. We're all capable of that kind of destruction when we feel powerless enough. They walked back toward town, where the celebration was winding down, people heading to beds that would be warm for the first time in weeks. You meant what you said, didn't you? Rachel asked. About leaving when spring comes? I did. I'm not made for staying in one place. You could be, if you wanted to be. Maybe. But wanting and doing are different things. She stopped walking, made him face her. The town wants you to stay. Officially. They're talking about making you mayor or whatever passes for it out here. Permanent leadership. I don't want that. I know. That's exactly why you should take it. She smiled. Good leaders are the ones who don't want power. They lead because they have to, not because they want to. You've proven that. Cade thought about it. Staying in Iron Ridge, helping rebuild, becoming part of something permanent instead of always passing through. It terrified him more than any winter storm or corrupt foreman. I'll think about it, he said, which wasn't agreement but wasn't refusal either. That's all I ask. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Work without desperation, meals with actual substance, sleep that restored instead of just pausing exhaustion. The sick recovered. The supplies held. The winter remained brutal, but survivable. Iron Ridge began to breathe again. Cade found himself settling into leadership not because he wanted it, but because it fit. He organized spring planning plans, negotiated trade agreements with Laramie and other towns, mediated disputes with patience he didn't know he possessed. People came to him with problems, and he solved them, not through force, but through clear thinking and fair judgment. He was becoming what he'd never intended to be, a pillar of the community. When spring finally arrived, it came like a benediction, snow melting, green pushing through brown earth, the world remembering how to live. The convoy families who'd left began returning, bringing new people with them, drawn by stories of Iron Ridge's survival against impossible odds. The town grew, rebuilt, thrived. And Cade stayed. Not because he had to, but because somewhere in the desperate fight for survival, this place had become home. These people had become his people. This responsibility had become his purpose. On a warm day in late spring, they held a ceremony. Officially appointed Cade as Iron Ridge's new leader, not through Harlan's model of fear and control, but through genuine democratic choice. People voted with full knowledge of who he was and what he'd done. They chose him anyway. Samuel presented him with a simple badge, hand-carved from wood salvaged from the burned depot. "This doesn't make you mayor or governor or any fancy title," the old man said, smiling. "Just makes you the person we trust to lead us. That enough for you?" Cade looked at the badge, at the faces watching, at Rachel standing proud in the front row. Thought about the man he'd been when he rode into Iron Ridge, running from his past, from responsibility, from connection. Thought about the man he'd become. Rooted, trusted, essential. "Yeah," he said, pinning the badge to his shirt. "That's enough." The ceremony turned into another celebration because Iron Ridge had learned to take joy where it found it. Music and food and laughter, the sound of a community that had survived its darkest hour and emerged stronger. Cade stood at the edge of it, watching, and allowed himself something he'd denied for years. Contentment. Not happiness. That was too much to ask. But contentment with who he was, what he'd done, where he'd ended up. "Looks good on you," Rachel said, appearing beside him and gesturing to the badge. "Feels strange." "You'll get used to it." She linked her arm through his, comfortable and familiar. "Welcome home, Cade Mercer." Home. The word should have felt like a cage. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath after drowning. "Yeah," he said, looking at Iron Ridge, scarred but standing, reduced but resilient, his town now in all the ways that mattered. Home. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue, the frontier spreading in all directions, full of possibility and threat in equal measure. But Iron Ridge stood firm, anchored by people who'd learned that survival wasn't about individual strength. It was about collective refusal to quit. And at its center stood a man who'd arrived as an outcast, survived as a fighter, and emerged as a leader worth following. The frontier had tested them. They'd passed. Winter would come again, storms would threaten, challenges would rise. But Iron Ridge would endure because they'd learned the greatest truth of frontier survival. Sometimes it takes an outsider to save what a community cannot see within itself. And sometimes that outsider discovers that the community saves them right back. The celebration continued long into the evening, but Cade eventually slipped away, needing a moment alone to process everything. He climbed to the ridge that gave the town its name, stood looking down at the lights below, at the rebuilt structures and smoking chimneys, and the evidence of life continuing against all odds. He thought about the rope that had been around his neck 3 weeks ago, about how close he'd come to dying without ever knowing what it meant to truly live. Thought about the choices that had led him here, the decisions that had seemed impossible at the time but were now just part of the story. Behind him, footsteps on stone. He didn't turn, knowing who it would be. Rachel stood beside him, looking at the same view, sharing the same silence. "Thank you," she said eventually. "For what?" "For staying when you could have run, for fighting when you could have quit, for caring when it would have been easier not to." She turned to face him. "For showing us what real leadership looks like." Cade wanted to deflect, to minimize, to do what he always did when faced with genuine appreciation. But maybe it was time to stop running from that too. "You're welcome," he said simply. They stood together as the sun set over Iron Ridge, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow. The frontier stretched ahead, vast and dangerous and beautiful, full of unknowable tomorrows. But for now, for tonight, for this moment, they'd survived. And that was everything.